Hello everybody! Apologies that we're late. It's the usual, like, multiplayer save game file transfer issue. I don't know what's going on with that one. I guess it's just whenever there's an update, you have to, like, redo the save, probably.
Yeah, well, yeah, especially because I'm pretty sure they put out a minor patch.
Yeah. I do remember having to update the game recently. Probably for the Thrones of Decay stuff. Oh my, what motion
we
did we?
apparently left off about to fight a battle. All right, why not?
Oh, wait, wasn't this one where the game kind of disconnected after the end of the battle? And then we were like, yeah, let's call it here, probably.
Well, we'll find out.
Only one way to find out.
So how have you been? Sorry that I've been sick the last 2 weeks.
It's all good, man. It happens. Yeah, when you were away, we were just kind of like... Well, I was teaching my friend Kiwi here about the Warhammer lore and introducing her to some of like the Warhammer cinematics and stuff. It was a pretty fun time.
That's good, that's good.
Kiwi commented, I replaced you. Mwahaha. Yeah, just
okay, they sound cuter to me, so that's probably an upgrade.
Okay. But yeah, just spending the week learning about more Warhammer lore, playing some Total War, and several other games as well, as we usually do.
Good, good, good. Let's see, why don't you take charge of these two big boys?
Sure.
And just keep them firing. I would say preferably at the Celestial Lion.
The Celestial Lion that he's riding?
Yeah, the general.
Okay. Would they be able to see from here? And it's kind of out of range. A little bit further up. From here... Yeah, we could probably say that.
Yeah, hopefully it won't make me auto-resolve this, because... Oh, here, you can also have this guy. You can do pretty much the same thing with him. Just make sure he's chasing that general around and shooting him without getting killed.
Roger.
Alrighty, let's boogie.
Two, target, three, target. Miguchi. You do have the drop rocks ability, okay. Honestly, this should be a super easy battle.
That should.
Ooh. Oh man, seeing those Bastillon shoot with the solar engine is so cool, man. Just this light, beam of light arcing through the sky.
Ooh, that was probably overkill. It'll be fine.
There is no such thing as overkill.
I forgot those were only archers, and I used the big boy version of my son. Yeah, that was a little overkill. Oh,
Well, it made for a cool shot, though.
Wanted to kill them, not to evaporate them from the face of existence. But, you know, we'll take what we can get.
Make sure to... Oh, the amount of damage you did, it probably evaporated their families back home, too. Let's see.
Croak delivers pizzas all over the world.
Oh yeah, that's right, we did do Croak's battle already. Oh shit, wait. Urgh, move out of the way. Stinking archers, man. So, who are these guys? Hybrid weapon specialist and wizard.
Oh yeah, you focus down the Junfan, the specialist.
Roger that.
Gate Guardian. I don't like his double shot garbage.
I have heard that the Gate Guardians are actually really, really good.
Yeah,
and you can like stack them.
Yeah, they're extremely strong heroes. They have a really nice mix of like support combat while also being good at. They have really good roles of like support combat, ranged fire, because I think they're the only hero in the game that has. I think they have a single shot crossbow actually. I remember that was they.
Thank you for the super chat,
we
Cobalt.
did this thing that we probably should have done ages ago, but we're doing it now. Hooray!
Also, I've received a super chat from Cobalt. He would like me to ask you about life as an ogre in Warhammer Fantasy. That was a video that I did do recently by good old Pancreas.
Life as an ogre.
Yeah.
Oh, Pancreas.
Yeah, Pancreas' video about it being like a good life to live, like one of the best races to live as.
That's an interesting opinion.
Yeah, what's your opinion?
I don't. I haven't dedicated a ton of thought to it until like this very moment. So being an ogre, it depends. So the thing that's really interesting about ogres, in a very, very like brief aside to get into that, is that ogres actually have a really messed up system when it comes to dealing with the birth of new children.
Oh, okay.
Where ogres, like when you're born into an ogre tribe as an ogre, you essentially are going to be evaluated usually by that tribe's butcher or slaughtermaster. And it's for two purposes. The first purpose is to check whether the child has the gift of magic. So if they're magically inclined, so to speak, then they will be taken by the butcher or the slaughtermaster in question, and will begin going through kind of the ritual processes of learning the shamanistic abilities of magic, which the first step of which is rather harrowing, because the very first thing you have to do is the butcher or slaughtermaster will literally take the baby and will bite like a big chunk out of their like body.
What?
Usually around their stomach area as like an offering to the Great Maw. So they'll eat a part of the baby while it's, you know, alive and stuff.
Lovely.
And that's like a big ritual portion of the beginning of their knowledge, and it can kill the baby. It usually doesn't, because ogres are insanely hardy, but it can. And that's just considered like, oh, okay, well, he wasn't destined for that then.
Yeah, it's an occupational hazard. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And the other thing that can happen is, which is a much, much worse case scenario, is that a baby can be evaluated by by someone within the tribe. And if the child is found in any way to be like problematic, like there's just something not quite right about it, or it's like born under like bad omens, or it has some kind of bad mutation that the tribe considers not to be good, which is pretty rare because ogres don't really care that much about mutation. But there can be a number of things considered wrong with the child, like it's too skinny, or it's just there's just something not right about it. They will take the baby and they will take it down to the caves that are usually beneath where the tribe hangs out, and will basically abandon it in the caves and like close a rock behind it. And it'll end up growing up to a gorger.
What's a gorger?
Gorgers are really horrifying monsters that lurk around. Well, they're roughly the same size as ogres. They're sometimes a little bit larger, but gorgers are basically the worst thing that can happen to an ogre, which is that babies that are rejected by the tribe, or ogres who are punished by the tribe, but it's almost always an infant, will be sealed in the caves beneath the tribe, where like all of their trash and like all of the leftovers go, essentially. Like they throw scraps and other bits down there, and they live in the cave systems down there and are basically just forcefully exiled. And the thing about them is, because there tends to be a lot of, oh yeah, no, you're right, we did get that weird waiting bug again. Okay,
no.
Well, now I know why. That's fine. Easy. Okay, so that's unfortunate. It means I'm going to take some unit losses, but that's okay. So
yeah, okay.
I will keep in mind that ambush battles just don't seem to be working on this build very well, and that's okay.
So
okay, now I know. But anyway, so the gorgers, the thing about them is that the problem with those caves down there is there's a lot of warpstone, like a ton of warpstone. So these babies will be, yeah, they'll be influenced by the warpstone, which ogres are quite heavily immune to chaos corruption and mutation. It takes a lot for them to mutate. So gorgers don't mutate. Instead, they're driven by like this horrible hunger that causes them to become super emaciated, and they grow into these really like purely muscular creatures. But because of the way the warpstone influences their bodies, they basically devolve into like completely animal-like intelligence. So they're not really like they're sentient, but they're not sapient, I think is the right word.
Okay.
They're not really like thinking creatures. They're just animalistic, horrifying monsters.
Gotcha.
But the really creepy thing about them is they adapt to life down in the caves to survive. Which means they can do things like, despite the fact that they're, you know, somewhere in the ballpark of like 10 to 12 feet, and sometimes larger, they have a very uncanny ability to, if they need to get through like a small hole in the cave. So like if one's chasing you and you're down in the darks of these caves, they can see in the dark. They don't need light to see. And even though they primarily hunt by smell. But gorgers are specialized ambush predators that move super duper fast. But the thing that is super scary about them is if you're running away from a gorger, which is like 12 feet tall, and it's got like these really long limbs and like razor sharp claws and all this other stuff, and you are like, oh look, there's like a 3-foot hole, so you like throw yourself on your hands and knees and you crawl through this hole because, hey, I'm small, I'm relatively small, that thing's super big, it can't fit. Well, when you come out on the other side and the gorger gets to that hole, the thing you'll realize that's really fucking horrifying about them is that they can essentially like fold and dislocate all of their limbs so that they can squeeze through holes that are way too big for them, or way too small for them. Because they spend most of their time down those caves hunting things like Skaven, and they're really well adapted to hunting Skaven, which is why Skaven are like fucking terrifying.
Okay, that makes sense. I see.
But they follow ogre tribes around. So whenever the tribes like move, their gorgers will usually follow them, either like underground or just at least nearby. And it's a whole thing on that the ogre, like, they're considered kind of shameful creatures because they're exiles essentially. Like, no, the only ogre that has any appreciation for gorgers is Scrag the Slaughterer, and it's just because he essentially views them as like children of the Great Maw in almost more of a true sense, because they're just completely, yeah, because they're just utterly possessed by hunger and like nothing else, like head empty, only food.
I see.
Scrag appreciates that. But yeah, their existence is pretty nightmarish because no matter how much they eat, they never get any like fuller. They are permanently like horrifically emaciated monsters that are perpetually trapped in starvation.
Yeah, that is a horrible existence. That sounds like a punishment you'd face in hell or something like that.
Yeah, but like I said, it's only if you're like seen as not good material. If you're not one of those, then yeah, I'd say that for the most part, ogre tribe life is like in the grand scheme of things in the Warhammer world, not too shabby. You know, a lot of ogres are heavily infected by wanderlust, so they're constantly compelled to sort of go on journeys and explore different parts of the world. So that's why you find them everywhere, is that they have really, really bad wanderlust. So they always are feeling the desire to go out on new adventures and things.
Is that like a genetic thing? They just inherently seek adventure?
It's kind of something in their blood. Where they have a very natural disposition to want to explore the world. But at the same time, because of kind of the curse, so to speak, of the Great Maw upon them, they eventually, at some point in their life, will feel or hear, so to speak, the Great Maw calling them home. And every ogre, at least once in their life, will be deeply compelled unavoidably compelled to return back to the Mountains of Morn to go make a pilgrimage to see the Great Maw. Which most survive, but not everybody does. I mean, because the Great Maw is vaguely sentient and will try to eat you if you get too close to it.
Of course it will. I mean, its whole thing is about eating, so makes sense.
Yep, it's the god of big eats, as they say.
Alright.
Yeah, it's actually funny. I've never thought of ogres as being like the best race to be a part of, but I can see the argument. I don't know if I necessarily agree, but I can be like, okay, like I could see
the thought process and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, what would you consider to be the best race to live as? If you had to be like, oh, I have to choose a race that I get reincarnated as into the Warhammer Fantasy universe. Which nobody probably wants to do, but...
Honestly, there are a number of places where, depending on the time period you arrive in, being a halfling would not be bad.
A halfling?
Yeah. Halflings can have pretty decent lives. As long as you don't live during, like, especially if you're like are born and live in the moot, as long as you're not born during like a really specific series of times when things in the moot got kind of which were relatively rare.
Okay.
Like the moot overall is pretty safe, despite how close it is to like Sylvania and everything. But like for the most part, halflings have it pretty good. They're a lot more. They're often described as very vulgar and vile, but that's because it's from like a human standard, and the halflings have very different cultural norms than humans do, which makes humans really irritated. Like halflings have a very strong sense of communal ownership instead of individual ownership. So like the idea to halflings about that you own this thing and it's for you and you alone because you own it, that's a mostly foreign idea to halflings that they find kind of odd.
Gotcha.
They, you know, to them, everything belongs to everyone because they live in extremely large clan family units. And that gets them, so because of that, they often get accused on a very regular basis of being thieves by every other race in the Warhammer world, because they'll just kind of lift things because they're like, oh, this is for everyone. Like, as long as you have a use for it, you can use it. And everyone else is like, no, that's not how property works.
Yeah. Okay, I see. Yeah, I haven't heard any like extensive lore about the halflings at all. I guess they don't really get mentioned.
They don't really come up a lot unless you're dealing with like the roleplay game. The roleplay game has like a really extensive focus on halflings. Other than that, like if you're just doing the battle game, they never come up because they don't have an army. So.
Okay, gotcha. Well, actually, to revisit some more lore about the ogres, is it potentially a reason why they have wanderlust because they were created by the old ones to kind of like actively hunt demons?
That is, I suppose that's not impossible. I would say there's not really a lot of evidence to support that, but you know, it certainly could be a thing. My lean-to would be like, I suppose I can't argue against that because there's, like I said, there's really not a lot to.
It's just like a thing that's known about them, not any like lead up to that, I suppose.
Yeah, it's just something that's they have like a really strong natural sense of like curiosity and really enjoy going to strange and new places. But the why of that is kind of more of just a general. It's explained more as a cultural thing as opposed to anything else. But I mean, that could certainly be an argument that's made, and I wouldn't say hunting demons was necessarily the point. It could be that there maybe was, in some way, shape, or form, like a point in the sense of making them a race that's very likely to proliferate, and so to like be in a lot of places. But the ogres, because I will say the important thing about the ogres is that they're very rushed. The big thing about the ogres is that the old one and the halflings is that they were made at the same time. And most sources agree they were made by like the same group or individual old ones, and they were very unfinished. Like they were super duper rushed, and the old ones did not have time to put a lot of like the finishing touches of any kind on them, and so before they died or vanished or whatever the hell happened to them. So it could be that like the wanderlust was an unintended accident, or that maybe it was supposed to have a greater function, but the old one, you know, exploded before they could finish programming whatever that was supposed to end up being.
Okay, so they're kind of like a prototype version, but the old ones also made the Lizardmen, no? I guess they're the more complete version?
Oh, well, they made the old ones made the Lizardmen, the elves, the dwarfs, humans, halflings, ogres, gnomes, some of the giants, but only like a really, really specific subset of giants, being the giants of Albion. All other giants were not, but supposedly the giants of Albion were, which is weird, but whatever. They made a whole bunch of species. The Lizardmen were the first.
Oh, okay. Lizardmen being the first. Oh, I mean,
but the Lizardmen were also...
Yeah?
The Lizardmen were designed as, like, caretakers, as opposed to part of the great experiment that the old ones were doing. Most of the races they created were supposedly to defeat chaos in some way. Like, they had a really important role in destroying, like, the dark gods and beating chaos once and for all and stuff like that. The Lizardmen were technically not part of that. The Lizardmen are the custodian race of the planet. So their job was to change the planet to be more suited to everything the old ones were doing, and to also protect all of the new little baby races that were arriving on the planet. So the Lizardmen were essentially the nannies that also needed to make sure that there was no problematic elements. So like the Saurus were out there exterminating races that the old ones considered inappropriate to their needs.
Okay.
The Slaughter are out there like reshaping reality and changing like the layout of the continents and doing a bunch of other really important things. skinks and the Crocscores were building the cities and doing all that stuff. But the elves were the first race that the old ones actually had like long-term plans for.
Hmm. Do we know the long-term plans? In any way at all?
We know that apparently the old ones made the elves first, and the elves were made to be very intrinsically magical. Like they are like intensely gifted with magic and have like magic as just part of their blood. Like magic is so natural to them that it's almost impossible to separate the two. And the old ones did that so that the elves would have like mastery over magic and be able to control and do a lot of other like really important little things. And then after the old ones like made them, they looked at the elves and were like, oh look, we've completed making these very gifted children of ours who are very gifted with magic. And then they kind of watched them for a little bit, and essentially something along the lines happened where the old ones went, oh no, this isn't gonna work. No.
What?
Because they realized that the elves were so magically inclined and were so intrinsically tied in with it that it made them extremely susceptible to corruption via the magic. That they were flawed, essentially. So the old ones went, okay, so this race was way too magical and has way too, and the being heavily influenced by magic innately makes them corrupt, easy to corrupt in a sense, makes them flawed. So then they tried the complete opposite, which is that they created the dwarfs, which of course are,
well, rip. Game crashed.
They created the dwarves, which they did the 100% opposite thing of what if we create a race that is completely anti-magical.
So that's why they can't use magic. Okay.
Yeah, my game flat out froze. Okay, there we go. And then that didn't work either because they realized that because the dwarfs were extremely obscenely resistant to magic, that they were also they were extremely stubborn and insular and did not adjust well to change. They weren't very adaptive. So the old ones once again kind of sat there and went, okay, this also didn't work, so let's try and make a race that's a little more in between. Like let's create our race that is more designed to like has adaptability at its heart. And that's when they created humans. And now whether humans were finished or unfinished is very debated by like scholars in the Warhammer world, many of which are human and elf. So most sources seem to agree that the humanity was unfinished. They were more finished than like say the ogres and the halflings, but they were not finished. They had certain like support structure to be resistant to chaos that was not fully implemented, that like the halflings and the ogres got, but the halflings and the ogres were so fresh and were like so not out of too early out of the oven that they had a whole bunch of other problems. But then there's other notes about how there are individual old ones that created other species. So like the gnomes were created by like a different little group. The Amazons were created by the old one Rig.
It's like their own little side project, basically.
Yes, and that opens a whole bunch of fun cans of worms, because then the question is, were these like sanctioned things that like they were allowed to do, or did they do them in secret and they weren't supposed to, or was it that the old ones could just do whatever they wanted and they were all kind of on the same page and we have no idea?
Okay. Chat wants to know what happens when Salon mages aren't around the Lizardmen. Apparently they go crazy?
They devolve. So there's a there is a temple city in the Dragon Isles that during the cataclysm, all of their Slaanesh got killed. And because of that, in the millennia that followed, the Lizardmen there started devolving more and more into like hardcore tribalism and all these really like they became much more superstitious, and without the Slaane's guidance they devolved to the point where they literally just fell back to purely relying on their animalistic senses. So if you go to the Dragon Isles in the modern age, they're just feral monsters. So you would just find like Saurus, Crocscores, and Skinks that are not capable of speech or higher thought or like construction or magic or anything else like that. They're literally just feral monsters.
Well, why is that? Dude, I mean, it's not like a hive mind, is it? That the Slaane controls them?
No, what probably happened is that the Dragon Isles has a really high rate of attrition based on where it is in the world. And it's likely something went wrong with the spawning pools, which is where the Lizardmen emerged from. So something about the spawning pools went wrong, and this likely resulted in the Lizardmen that were emerging from the spawning pool were more and more, animalistic and primal. And this problem just, it's, think of it like as an error in like a replicating code. So like if you have a machine that's supposed to perform a function, but there's something slightly wrong with it, and there's nobody around to fix it because nobody understands how it works. So over time, it just continues to degenerate. That's likely what happened to them.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, they were kind of like, well, machines made to purge chaos, so yeah, that does make a lot of sense in that aspect.
Yeah, and the Lizardmen, the old ones did a fairly good job of designing them, but the Lizardmen as a species rely very heavily on a lot of their more like reptilian senses and like natural drives and impulses, which helps them most of the time, but it can make them vulnerable to things going wrong because of that. So like skinks are, it's like there's the whole idea that, oh, the Lizardmen are automatons, so they must not feel anything, which isn't true. The Lizardmen do feel. They just feel in different ways than like humans do. But like in a perfect world, skinks would have been like unfeeling, almost automaton-like creatures that were perfectly engineered to fulfill the great plan no matter what, like without regard for anything else. But in reality, skinks are extremely skittish creatures that if someone accidentally, like if there's a really loud noise on the battlefield or something really scary looking, the skinks are extremely likely to panic and flee from the situation to regroup somewhere else, which is
it's not ideal war machine. Yeah,
and it's like even the Saurus, which are often referred to as kind of like death machines that tend to think and feel very little, even Saurus can get like terrified and like can face something that just really rattles that more base animal instincts in them for a part of their brain to go, oh god, we gotta get out of here, like we gotta run. Which if the old ones had designed them flawlessly would not be the case. But the important thing about the old ones is that they weren't perfect at all. Like all of their creations have severe flaws. And they also like, kind of set into motion and engineered their own killing themselves. So
yeah,
they weren't, they had issues.
I see. Well, I mean, the Lizardmen seem to be doing fine on their own at the very least, and they do kind of survive into AOS.
True. Yeah, they are They are the only order race that canonically survived the end times because they just flew into space.
They got, yeah. That's the answer to everything. Just go to space, man. Oh, love it. I also recently learned about like all the dwarf holds and stuff like that. I had a few confusions here and there though. Was the time of woes when the calamity happened, aka chaos, broke through, and that's why? Yeah.
No, the time of woes is known as. It mostly revolves. It revolves around a series of wars that happen after the War of Vengeance, so the war against the elves. And the big one that it takes up most of the bandwidth is called the Goblin Wars. And the TLDR essentially is that the dwarfs got into this really big ugly war with the elves because of everything that happened with Kaldor II, and it was like really bad and stuff. Yeah. And the dwarves won the war, but it cost them very heavily in like the resource department and like just bodies. Like it was a horrible war for both sides. But the dwarves ultimately won, and while the elves did manage to destroy all of the dwarf settlements that were not part of like the mountains, so there used to be a whole bunch of dwarf settlements that were out in like the hills. They were out in more like open terrain, in what we know is like the Empire nowadays. So there was like a whole bunch of dwarf holds out there that were just built into like the natural hills or in more exposed environments. They all got absolutely obliterated by the dragons. And what ended up happening was that after the war, the dwarves were like, okay, well, the good news is we are invincible in our mountains. So even though the war cost us a lot, we're okay. And then a earthquake, the likes of which has never been seen before or since, went off that radiated up the entirety of the World's Edge Mountains, and it was so bad that it caused literally all of the dwarf holds defenses to get cracked open. A lot of the holds, the Ungren Road, which was known as the Underway, which is like the whole Underway stance thing, which was an underground road that connected all the holds, that got cracked open and like flooded with water, flooded with lava or magma, or parts of it just completely caved in, and like so thousands and thousands of dwarves are killed by this horrible, not so natural disaster. And all of the holds were cracked open, so their invulnerable defenses were no longer invulnerable because there were big gaping holes in them. And the goblins, the greenskins, but especially the goblins, had been kind of lurking in the dark and growing steadily in number over the course of the War of Vengeance because the dwarves were too busy with the high elves. So now you had this massive tide of greenskins just come pouring into all of the holds. And the dwarves went from having not lost a single mountain hold since the Cataclysm, which was many thousands of years ago, to suddenly losing like dozens of holds within a span of months. Like, it was a massacre. It was really bad.
I see.
But so a lot of dwarf holds fell during the Goblin Wars, and then even when the Goblin Wars finally kind of ended, there was a follow-up war when Thunder Mountain, if you ever are looking around like Carrick 8 Peaks, or it's not Carrick 8 Peaks, if you're looking at Karasakarak and Black Crag, there's a really fucking giant volcano right between them ish. And that giant volcano is the biggest volcano in the old world, and it's called Thunder Mountain. And Thunder Mountain erupted after like a little bit after the Goblin Wars had wrapped up, and the eruption of Thunder Mountain caused a big problem where it like erupted, which caused a bunch more earthquakes and stuff. But more importantly, as it was spewing hot ash and magma everywhere, it caused the absolutely massive troll population that lived in and around the mountain to migrate. So there was this massive troll migration into all the dwarf holds, which was known as the Troll Wars. So a bunch of trolls started moving in and causing problems. And the Age of Woe literally kept up for many hundreds of years, and it only finally ended with the coming of Sigmar Heldenhammer. And Sigmar, who united the 12 tribes of the Empire and teamed up with the dwarves. He saves High King Kurgan Ironbeard, who got captured by Greenskins, which would, was bad and was going to get really bad. But Sigmar saves him, and that's when he gives Sigmar Galmaraz, or the Warhammer, as a gift for saving him. And then the two of them end up teaming up and leading their respective peoples against one of, if not the largest greenskin invasion the world had ever seen, which was trying to move through Blackfire Pass to go into what we now know as the Empire, to just take everything. And Sigmar and the dwarfs all teamed up, and they made their final stand there, which is known as the First Battle of Blackfire Pass. And despite being hilariously outnumbered, the dwarves and the greenskin, or the dwarves and the humans, end up winning the day. So they win, and that victory shatters the greenskins and pushes them back into the Badlands. And it was such a crushing victory that the dwarves mark it as the end of the Age of Woe.
I see. Just because of how monumental that was against the tide of greenskins.
Yeah, and it very much signaled kind of the turning of the tide, because the dwarves were really able to stabilize and even start reclaiming a couple of holds, and things started getting much better for them. And it helped that they had a whole bunch of new allies from that fancy little new nation of humans that had just moved in.
Nice.
I'm so close to being able to recruit all the units I want. Nearly there.
Yeah, we are pretty far into the end game here. Unfortunately, Zinch is just keeping on messing with my armies. I can't regen anybody. They're all taking attrition.
Yeah, that mutagenic energies is the most annoying fucking ability. Ugh.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I remember you telling me to get rid of Kairos within like the next 10 turns. I don't think that's happening.
Yeah, he's pretty durable. Hound of Elements, thank you very much for the $10. Lizardmen, I'm going to the one place not corrupted by chaos. Space! Yeah. Fucking love Tim Curry.
Is it not registering? Okay, there we go. Chat wants to know, does Sotek have any book recommendations? Now I want to dive deeper into the Warhammer lore.
That depends what you want to learn about. If you don't know anything about Warhammer at all, and you're like, I don't even know what I want to read, then you want to start with Gotrek and Felix.
Well, there you go.
It is the perfect like entry zone into Warhammer Fantasy, because one of the Felix, who's kind of the main character, is treated very much as an everyman, so he kind of like explains everything that he's seeing from a very human perspective, which helps put everything into perspective for the reader. And it's just a brilliant, really fun series.
Oh yeah. I feel like Gotrek and Felix is just kind of like the beyond and all entryway into the Warhammer Fantasy lore. Just a fun story coupled with lore.
It is, and the nice thing is, like, there's almost the entire series is on Audible now. So if you're someone that prefers listening instead of reading, there are audiobook versions of almost all the books now.
Damn. At this point, we should get sponsored. Oh. Of course.
Oh, you got Slanesh demons coming in?
Yeah, they see Zinch pouncing on me and they're like, ah, we want in on that one.
Typical Slanesh. They see someone getting railed and they want in on it.
They just can't help themselves. It's part of their nature. Can't fault them for that. Chat would like to know, who is Gorbad Ironclaw?
Gorbad Ironclaw. So he's a character that's on a lot of people's mind right now because he is a very likely contender for the upcoming Corn Ogre Greenskin DLC, which everyone's getting really excited about.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Goodness knows I'm really excited about it. But Gorbad. So the best way to explain Gorbad Ironclaw is that he's like a really silly but kind of, I think, straightforward way to explain him is he's kind of like the Napoleon of orcs.
What?
So Gorbad's whole gimmick is that the vast majority of orcs, like pretty much all of them, are absolute morons when it comes to tactics. Like they have no understanding of tactics whatsoever. The greenskin philosophy is scream wah, run forward, smash.
Yeah.
That's it. That's as far as it goes. Gorbad was a military genius by greenskin standards. Because a lot of people go, oh well, you know, you got like your Skarsnicks and your Grom the Paunches and stuff, so like goblins are the smart ones. Gorbad sees that and spits on it and says, no, I'm the smart one. But he was basically a genius level orc tactician that was also like super strong in his own right. He's called Gorbad Ironclaw because for his weapons, he had a big choppa axe weapon in one hand, and then I think it was his left hand, is basically like just a big set of iron claws. Like he has like a glove that's just got a bunch of claws on it, that he wields in battle, and he rides a really big pig. So he is the cavalry character as well for the orcs. But Gorbad, I want to say he was like 400 years ago, maybe 600 years ago. I can't remember exactly how many centuries, but a good number of centuries ago. So like it's still vaguely the modern era, but like a while ago, he started boiling up through the Badlands, and it quickly became apparent that he was going to be a problem because he was like absolutely just kicking the crap out of any other like war boss that even looked at him funny. And as he made his way north and started like getting a bunch of military victories, he approached the dwarfs, who he bodied, and then he came into the Empire, and it was really bad. There used to be an imperial province in the southern part of the Empire, which was called Solend, and Solend got literally wiped off the map by Gorbad. And Gorbad even got, in the final stand of Solend, Gorbad dueled the Elector Count of Solend, killed him, and took his Runefang as a trophy. So he was one of the only baddies to ever invade the Empire who like successfully killed a Runefang wielder and took it as a prize, and it was lost for many hundreds of years. But Gorbad, so he invades the Empire, and he was basically unstoppable until he finally arrived at Altdorf, and he laid siege to Altdorf. And I can't remember if it was during the siege of Altdorf. No, it was before. It may have actually been in the fight with the Elector Count of Solend, but Gorfang does get wounded and his wound that he gets slows him down a bit. So he's still going, and he was still strong, and nobody could beat him in a challenge.
Yeah.
But he wasn't able to be quite as aggressive as he used to. And he ends up attacking Altdorf, and he just can't break the city open. Like, he attacks it, and he holds it under siege for a while. But the thing about Greenskins is they don't do well with long-term sieges, because they get bored and they start infighting. And because he was already kind of struggling, he was already wounded, he wasn't really able to maintain good control of his forces, and so his forces started falling apart because of this protracted siege in pretty deep in enemy territory. And he did have like he didn't, by no means did he just like lose loot. He did unleash, I think it was 3 wyverns on the city of Altdorf during the sieges, and one of the wyverns went on to eat Emperor Sigismund. So the emperor at the time gets killed. So the emperor died, which was a bit of a bummer. But the siege reaches the point where Gorbad realizes that he's not going to win. There's just there's too much against him, and he himself isn't really able to maintain control of his horde, and he realizes that. So instead of just like sitting there and being like, oh well, I guess I'll just die, he decides to retreat. So he falls back. But this is where the history gets a little muddy, because what we know happens is that he takes what's left of his Wa, and he flees from Altdorf and starts heading back to try and regroup. And as he's falling back, his horde gets stuck basically between a pursuing Empire army and a dwarf army coming from the other direction, because the Dawi knew he was in the vague area and wanted revenge for him doing a bunch of damage. So his Wa gets caught between 2 forces, and it just gets utterly wiped out. Now, the thing is that historically, nobody knows what happened to Gorbad. Because basically what it says is that if the dwarves had killed Gorbad, they surely would have wanted to tell everybody about it, brag about the fact that they had wiped out this great enemy of the dwarfs, and killed him. But the dwarfs basically refused to comment on the situation, say what happened. But Gorbad was never seen again after that. So some scholars speculate that Gorbad is dead and that he was killed by the dwarfs in the aftermath, and that was that. But others speculate that he escaped and got away, and basically went on to lick his wounds in some other part of the world and could return any day to terrorize the old world once more. Or alternatively, maybe because of his wound, he managed to escape, and then he went to some cave and died, unknown and forgotten. Or maybe he escaped and went to some other random part of the world and is just out there somewhere. So it's one of the great mysteries, and they did essentially the same thing with Grom the Paunch, where Grom the Paunch, after old Blacktooth is defeated at the Battle of Tor Yvres, Grom is seen fleeing the battle, and then he's basically never seen again after that. So there's a lot of speculation in the Warhammer world about where he is, except for in Grom's case, it's actually a little more unique because there was a follow-up story to the Battle of Ulthuan where Eltharion the Grim invades the Badlands, and in the original story he actually does find Grom and track him down and kill him. But Games Workshop later got rid of that story and essentially retconned it to Eltharion never finds Grom, so Grom is canonically just out there hiding somewhere, which is of course the storyline that Total War Warhammer ends up running with, is that he basically returns to his one of his old hiding places whether that be in the massive Oracle in Bretonia or Misty Mountain in the Badlands, and is just, you know, biding his time for revenge. But Gorbad's the exact same way, where he vanished 800 years ago and nobody knows where he is.
And I mean, greenskins are kind of basically immortal in a way.
They just are. Greenskins will not die of old age.
Okay.
To our knowledge, the only thing that seems to kill greenskins in the sense of old age is more like boredom. Where like if they don't fight, like if they just kind of stagnate and they don't seem to have a purpose to their life, it can seemingly result in them having, like, them reaching a point where they just sort of get older and more like kind of fall apart and eventually die. But we've never really like seen it happen. But the only confirmed cases there are of greenskins, quote unquote, dying of old age is goblin shamans, which is particularly night goblin shamans. But it's not really old age that kills them. It's that they eat so many like magical shrooms, which are often called shaman shrooms. But they basically consume so much magic on such a ridiculous scale that they end up kind of like overdosing on it. And when they reach a certain age and a certain level of power without proper precautions, they themselves will literally turn into a shaman shroom. So they turn into these big mushrooms that will usually then go on to be eaten by other goblin shamans.
I guess it's how you want to view it, but maybe they kind of just live on within the other goblin shaman. They are all just basically spores, yeah.
Yeah, you could argue that. I don't think that's necessarily the way the eaten ones would argue. But, yeah.
Yeah, I see. Very interesting creatures. Like, how many kinds of greenskins are there? Because apparently the Noblars that serve the ogres are also a bit different from the other goblins in a way. Yeah.
Yes, so the broad, and I mean really broad, categories of greenskins are, you have regular goblins, which you have just your basic bitch goblins that live out in the the plains and the hills and the badlands, and these are also your goblins that tend to make up like the wolf tribes that run around the wolf lands in the darklands, and also run around some parts of like the border princes in the badlands. Then you have your night goblins, which night goblins are of course a subterranean subspecies that are very averse to sunlight, and so they wear those big old black robes to cover their bodies and their faces so that they don't have to be blinded by the harsh sun and all that stuff. You have your forest goblins, which are goblins that have quite literally evolved to live alongside and in harmony, so to speak, with the spiders of the forests, which have some similarities in their own way to night goblins, in that they also tend to be very averse to sunlight and they live in like the deep dark forests, but they have a much more like they have a much more natural relationship, so to speak, with like their environment, where like they tend to be mostly nude except for like war paint, and then they take things from their environment like birds' feathers, or they'll take like feathers from the caps of empire nobles or empire captains and stuff that they kill, and they'll like embed it in their flesh to make themselves look fancy and important. And they wear like all sorts of different bits and pieces of like different spiders or other creatures of the forest to make themselves be like, look at me, I'm important and interesting and stuff. So you have forest goblins, and then from there you get into things like Noblars, which are technically a goblin species, though they're rather unique as far as they go, having like a pretty being like a different size, they're notably smaller than regular goblins. But they are considered a goblin species. So you have your Noblars, which of course lived in Noblar country, out in like the southern Darklands, and eventually got their home territory, so to speak, started getting eaten up by Chaos Dwarfs. And they were scared of getting enslaved, so that's why they kind of moved in with the ogres and developed a symbiotic relationship with the ogres. Then from there, if you want to get, those are like the broad categories of goblins. But if you want to get super technical, there are more subspecies within those categories. So like there's a species of goblins that are said to exist, which you see represented in Total War, which are known as fire kobolds. And fire kobolds are goblins that live in volcanoes or around volcanoes and have adapted to that kind of environment. And you see those with like your lava rider, your lava spider riders, and your lava Arachnarok spider rider or spider mount guys. And you also have the Boglars, which Boglars are Noblars that have developed to living in swamps, in and around swamps. So they have different features and characteristics that make them better for like aquatic living and living in like a harsh marsh environment that comes with all of the difficulties that can exist in that environment when it comes to like the diseases and other issues that a swamp might present. But yeah, so like I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on for greenskins there. And then you got your hobgoblins, but hobgoblins are very notably a different species. Like they're more of a hard line different species. They're kind of between goblins and orcs.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot. I guess it's more of like a environmental thing and adapting, and then that kind of just changes.
Greenskins are, because the important thing to remember about them is that they're a fungal species. And they're extremely adaptable, but depending on the environment their fungal spores are in, they change a fair bit depending on the environment in which like they live, which are very similar to trolls. Trolls are like that a lot too. Trolls are hyper adaptable.
I see. Okay, well, actually, speaking of, we were talking a little bit about theories about the new DLC and stuff. I haven't looked into it at all. What's coming? Like, do you know anything or have any theories?
Oh, I have a lot of theories. But yeah, Khorne Ogres Greenskins, which is really exciting. And also, I called that like a year and a half ago. But I have a lot of theories. Like I put out here's what I'm hoping we'll get from Khorne video, and it was just that. I'm like, I'm not going to talk about any mechanics. I'm just going to talk about like units and like characters and stuff. And that still ended up, I was like, so, you know, I can keep it short. I can keep it concise and short. It still ended up being an hour long.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah, you have a lot of theories going on. It just goes on and on and on, and you realize you've been recording for hours.
Yeah, I mean, I am super excited, and all three of those factions are. It's a really clever grouping, not just like for theme reasons. Like the theme, yeah, cool. The theme's great and all, but I think it's actually a really, really clever trio. Because in the grand scheme of Total War, while all of those definitely have tons of units that are missing that everybody really, really wants and is excited for. Well, Khorne, not as much. Khorne is actually, they're going to have to, I'm curious how they're going to fill out the Khorne roster, because getting 5 units for Khorne is a little tricky. The really exciting bit is that, like, one of the, not issues, but one of the things that people really, really liked about Thrones of Decay that was notably difficult was that all of the races in Thrones of Decay desperately needed like free LC updates. Where it's like the dwarfs were pretty boring. Nurgle was not fun to play for a lot of people, and the Empire was also really basic bitch. So like all of them desperately needed really serious attention, and Creative Assembly did a really good job of handling it, where they gave them all really serious attention, and I think most people would agree did a really good job. Whereas like if you compare it to Shadows of Change, one of the big, and I think completely fair, criticisms of Shadows of Change is that Cathay and Kislev needed some pretty serious reworks and didn't get it. Like, their campaigns are functional, but they're not terribly exciting. And like, if you look at like Kostaltin, his campaign barely makes any sense for his character.
Oh yeah,
and like
I've seen complaints about it.
And like the Cathay, the Great Bastion mechanic is like really boring and really only seems to do anything for Miao Ying. But even though it interacts well with, or like even though Miao Ying is like close to it and it's obviously important for her, it's more of a punishment mechanic as opposed to like a fun mechanic. Like you don't get any benefits really that are particularly notable or exciting for properly defending the wall. Like there's a lot of issues, and like the, you know, it's like, oh, the caravan mechanic is really bad for Cathay compared to like the Chaos Dwarfs, and that shouldn't be the case. They should be equally good. But the Chaos Dwarf one is just way better. So all that to say that I actually think the Greenskins Ogre Khorne trio is a really smart move by CA, because they need substantially less work overall. Khorne and the Greenskins have really good mechanics, and they're fun to play. They're really straightforward. Like, I think you could argue reasonably that they could use like little tiny tweaks here and there. Like, you know, oh, the Greenskins, it'd be nice if like the Legendary Lords had some slight bonus mechanics to make them feel a little more unique. Or and you know, same thing with Khorne when he gets hopefully 2 new characters. But like for the most part, they have really good campaigns that barely need any adjustments. The Ogre Kingdoms need some very big adjustments, but this will be the first time they're doing a DLC where only one of the races needs major free LC changes instead of all 3 races needing major free LC changes. So that's going to be like a much better workload for CA compared to the last 2 DLCs.
So they can like properly rebalance the ogres and give them something interesting, whereas the others they can just add in a few more units and it still works. Okay, I see.
Yeah, essentially.
Chat says, there are some theories going on. Who is Skulltaker? I'm assuming that's definitely Khorne.
What? No, why would you think that? Yeah, so Skulltaker is the simplest way to put it is that Skulltaker is the big bad bloodletter or herald of Khorne for Khorne. So he is far and above the most gifted duelist that Khorne has. So like where Scarbrand is just like a insane big murder mess berserker type character who just, you know, he's a big rampaging monster that smashes everything in front of him. And Valkia is more like Valkia is almost more like a specialized assassin who has like a really good anti-large gimmick that makes her good for like dive bombing exposed characters or important units or monsters and stuff like that. Skulltaker is like the ultra duelist. So he is hyper specialized in going up against elite characters or melee characters and just bodying them. And from a lore standpoint, his whole gimmick is that he just travels around the realms of chaos, or often the material world, looking for people to challenge, to basically like prove his and Korn's superiority. So he'll just show up like outside of somebody, like a castle or a dwarf hold or a vampire count, like undead city or a lizardman settlement. Like he just shows up places and he'll basically just loudly declare like, hey, like, you know, someone come out and fight me. And he'll just keep issuing challenges until someone inevitably comes out and fights him, and then he'll usually body them. And the thing about his combat style that's unique for Khorne characters is that a lot of Khorne characters, their goals are to kill you very quickly and brutally.
Yeah.
Usually like, and usually it's like they'll decapitate you, or Volkio will like spear you through the heart really fast, but it tends to be like bloody, brutal, and quick. Skulltaker is very performative, and his entire thing is that he kind of wants to show off. So what he will do is he will very deliberately, instead of like killing you immediately, he will do his best to drag out the battle as long as possible and kill you death by 1,000 cut style. So he'll keep like slicing tendons or bleeding you as much as possible until you get so exhausted that you collapse on the ground. And then if you were a good opponent, he'll give you like a big he'll salute you. I mean, he always salutes before the battle starts anyway, but he will once he wins, instead of decapitating people, he'll put his sword away and he grabs both sides of your head with his hands, and he'll cause this hellfire to literally start burning the person alive, and he burns all of the flesh and muscle and everything on their head so that all that's left is their skull, completely perfect and without any like gore or anything on it. And then he takes your skull.
So Skulltaker. Okay.
Yeah, and he'll take it back to Khorne, and depending on the circumstances of the person and the duel and everything, either the skull will be added to Khorne's throne, or Skulltaker gets to keep it for himself, and he will add it to his cloak, because he has this really famous cape that he wears that's entirely made out of skulls of people that he's killed.
Ah, of course he does.
And the thing that's really scary about Skulltaker is that he has a very unique power within the lore, which is that anytime Skulltaker kills someone and takes their skull, he adds a tiny portion of their strength to his own.
Oh, okay.
So he's very obsessive about it, because ultimately it just makes him stronger. And he, according to a more modern source that we have, Skulltaker has only lost a single duel in all of his existence.
And who was that
and
against?
It was with Sigmar Heldenhammer.
Oh, of course.
And they fought, if I recall correctly, I think they fought for 3 days and 3 nights before Sigmar finally struck Skulltaker down. And it was so bad. Like, it was such a... Sigmar hit Skulltaker so goddamn hard that Skulltaker, despite being a demon, which means he's an etheric entity that does not have a true mortal form, he's a creature, he's more like a spirit or something that exists within the realm of magic. Despite that, he has a permanent scar on his, every time he manifests his physical body and whatever, he has a permanent scar where Sigmar hit him with Golmaraz.
Oh my god.
Because Sigmar is just crazy that way.
Yeah, he just trains at the gym. I see.
And that's also why Skulltaker has like a really big hate boner for Empire people in particular. Like, he tends to harass the Empire more than most other places. Even though he's
makes
not,
sense.
he's not supposed to have priorities, but he does.
Gotcha. A little bit of a bias, but that can be forgiven. Sigmar did hit you really, really hard after all. Oh. I can't even ask you about this. The last part of that name is so bad. Let's see.
Oh, what, Goldfag?
Ah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a super famous character in Warhammer history.
Yeah.
That unfortunately suffers a little bit from like ogre naming conventions and the fact that England did not care about that word. Because to them it meant something very different.
Yeah, I get that.
But which like there's proposals that they might try and pronounce it different, so like they might pronounce his name like Goldfag, or more like you're saying Fade, but honestly I think as long as you just treat it as one word it'll be fine. But
I see. Yeah.
Goldfag is he's super, like in real world, he is he's a very old Warhammer Fantasy character. He was introduced a really long time ago with the Dogs of War, actually. He's like the first ogre character that was ever made.
Okay.
And so he like predates the ogre kingdoms by like a good number of years. At least a whole edition. He might be earlier than the Dogs of War book, or the 5th edition book anyway. But he is one of the big OGs of the mercenary factions in Warhammer Fantasy. He appeared in a White Dwarf a long time before that. But basically the idea was that he was an ogre. So he was the first representation of what ogres were in Warhammer Fantasy. And the idea is that he led the Man-Eaters, which was that he was a big ogre that led a bunch of other ogres, and they all called themselves Man-Eaters after him. And that is still true in the modern lore, where the whole concept of an ogre Man-Eater is basically just a bunch of ogres like claiming to be Goldfag or stealing his name as an epithet, where they will advertise themselves as, you know, Man-Eaters or the Man-Eater, despite the fact that it's technically his title and no one else's. But it's all ogres like emulating his style, essentially. But he is far and above the most prolific ogre mercenary in the entirety of the Warhammer world. Like, it's not even close. He is beyond famous, but there are a number of jokes about him in the lore. Most notably that he actually hates being called Goldfag Man-Eater, because he doesn't like the term. He dislikes the term Man-Eater.
Why is that?
He views it as offensive because he eats much more than just men. He doesn't just eat humans. He eats a lot of different things. And the thing that annoys him the most about it is that he thinks that the term implies that eating humans is like his favorite food, and that's not true. He actually rates humans relatively low on his totem pole of like favored things to eat.
I mean,
his favorite food is actually halflings.
Oh, well, lovely. Poor halflings, though. That's a pretty funny reason. I guess that's just par for the course when it comes to the ogres and their incredible intellect.
Yeah, but he shows up in quite a few stories, and he's been a part of a lot of really borderline goofy escapades. But he's done a lot. Like he basically had the scene from Star Wars Episode 4, like the whole medal ceremony thing. Is that he's received like an imperial seal from Karl Franz himself. So he was like,
Wow.
it doesn't say what he did necessarily to earn that. He was involved in some major battle where like he devastated like the flank of a chaos horde or something. But yeah.
All right. Well, there goes Kairos. Getting ambushed by the sneaky skink.
As in
Okay,
he's dead? I would be very happy if he was dead.
I mean, Kairos is dead. He still has like what? 20 settlements? That man has been expanding. Like all the Lizardmen down here are dead, probably.
Just as I'm like finally getting the Bretonians under control down here, goddamn orc army spawns that I gotta chase down now.
Of course, it always happens. There we go. Okay. Chat would like to know what your top 5 squigs are out of the 48 types, and I had no idea that there were 48 of them. My goodness. Why are there so many?
Honestly, there's probably
There's
way more
more?
than 48.
What?
There's a lot of different kinds of squigs. My top 5 favorite. My favorite squig is the exploding squigs. Exploding squigs are just amazing. I don't know how anyone cannot love them because they're so ridiculous.
I'm sorry, so it's like I absolutely despise them every single time, man. I can't like you can hear the sound of them coming, but in the middle of an orc horde in Warhammer 40k Space Marine, they'll sneak up on you. They killed me so many times. I hate them so much.
Yes, I love exploding squigs. At least the fantasy variant. I can't speak to the 40k variant, but I love the fantasy variant. Second favorite would be colossal squigs. Colossal squigs are hilarious, being that they're just gigantic. They're literally just giant squigs. It was actually kind of one of the funniest decisions to me. In my mind, it's really funny how like in 40k, when they were like, oh, we need to make a giant squig-like creature, they made the squigodons, which are basically just big dinosaurs. Like they don't really look like squigs. Like they're just big dinosaurs, which is fine. They're cool. But in fantasy, when they were like, oh, we need to make a really big squig, instead of like making some unique looking big monster, some designer was just like, oh, okay, and he just made a big squig. Like he just made a singular, very large squig and was like, there you go, there's a giant squig. But I have a very strong affinity for the colossal squig, especially because I played Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning a lot, and the very first dungeon, the first real raid level dungeon that you would do
was against a giant squig.
Was Gunbad Mountain, and the final boss is a colossal mutated squig called Ard to Feed, and he's a really fun boss. But anyway, my third favorite variant is spike squigs. Despite I hate them, but they've had a dramatic impact on my life, so I also love them. And once again, that's because of Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning, because the squig herders would run spike squigs, and they drove me insane because their DPS wasn't just stupid. I hated those little bastards. So spike squigs would be my third favorite, and then my fourth favorite would probably be Mangler squigs. Mangler squigs are amazing and hilarious, and the fact that we do not have them in Total War Warhammer yet is a tragedy. I am deeply hoping that the upcoming DLC will have Mangler squigs in it. Which, if you don't know what Mangler squigs are, it's 2 really big giant cave squigs, like notably larger than Gobla, which is Skarsnik squig, like notably larger than Gobla. And they are chained together and then just kind of like shoved out onto the battlefield, and one of the squigs will hop trying to like get away from the other one or attack the other one, and because it hops, all the chains get pulled taut, and they pull the other squig, which then hops, and it makes this horrific amount of motion that basically just turns them into a whirlwind of chains and gnashing teeth. And it as far as rules are concerned, it's literally just a Night Goblin fanatic, but like scaled up to 2 absolutely monstrous squigs. So it's basically like a Night Goblin fanatic on cocaine. Taken to like the 12th degree. And they were devastating on tabletop. Mangler squigs were an absolute nightmare to deal with. And they're super duper fun. And actually, I just realized I messed up my list. So move everything that I've said down by 1 and put Gobla at the top, because Gobla is amazing and I love Gobla. I would die for Gobla. Gobla has to be number 1 on every list.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I still can't believe there's so many different squigs. I guess it's once again the case of like environment and purpose that it's grown.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, let's see. Just off the top of my head, there are squig gabas, there are gas squigs, armored squigs, squig armor. There's a special breed of bounding squig. There's squigs that there's oh my god, I'm drawing a blank on what they're called. But yes, there's a lot of squigs.
Of course. Chat would like to know about the aliens in fantasy. Like the Moon Empress of Cathay.
I feel like yeah, I mean, yes, technically she is an alien. I feel like for a lot of people she kind of stretches the term, because like she's not from like outer space, she's just from like the moon. But yeah, that does still technically make her an alien. But I mean, I don't know what you want me to add other than like, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
she's an alien.
Yeah, she's an alien. She's from the moon.
Does that mean that there are other races living on the moon too?
There used to be. The Moon Empress is very explicitly said to be the last of her kind. And it seems that something happened where she fled from the moon, either right before or either she knew there was a calamity coming and she fled before it happened, or something bad just happened and she left then. But because me and Andy Law's theory on it is that essentially that in some way, shape, or form she became aware of what was going to happen, the whole thing with the polar gates exploding and chaos coming into into the world. And so because she knew that was coming down the pipeline, she fled the moon and came to the Warhammer world, where she would, and she's a shapeshifter for anyone that doesn't know. A lot of people think she understandably think that she is a dragon. She is not a dragon. She is a shape-shifting moon alien that takes the form of a dragon. But she can shapeshift into anything she wants. And she is the reason why her children can shapeshift very easily into true humans. It's not an illusion. They're actually shapeshifting. And that's because they are part shapeshifter, just like their mother. So she escaped from some kind of calamity that wiped out the rest of her people on the moon. But yeah, the whole thing of there being like a court of celestial beings on the moon is a very well established trope in a lot of like Chinese and Japanese mythology and other like Eastern cultures. So that was like a really fitting call in for Warhammer. It's just a shame that they all got wiped out. We don't know much about them. outside of like the Moon Empress and the stuff that she likes and does. But then you have Moonclaw. Moonclaw is an alien, but instead of being from Mansalib, which is often known as the True Moon, which is like our moon, Moonclaw was born from Morsalib, which is the Chaos Moon. And Moonclaw is a really gross, nightmarish beastman like entity. He's not truly a beastman because he's literally an alien. He is not of this world. But Moonclaw is a real piece of work. And he is the child of Morsalib to the point that Morsalib will intervene to protect him. And he can like call upon his mom to aid him in battle, to where if there is enough magic present in the world, especially, he can manifest a lot of really crazy powers. But one of the things he's able to do quite casually is he calls upon Morsalib, and Morsalib will quite literally spit meteors of warpstone that come crashing down on the battlefield.
Oh my god.
To explode the people that he's fighting. And he, for anyone that really likes their themings, Moonclaw is also especially scary because he is the living manifestation of the concept of insanity or madness.
What does that mean exactly?
That means that if you get anywhere near him for any reason whatsoever, you will go insane. He basically is a walking embodiment of mental mutation. So he has a special rule in tabletop called Waves of Insanity, which is that if you are anywhere near him, he basically causes your brain to kind of start melting. Like your brain starts to break down and your understanding of reality and perception, all that stuff starts to fall apart, and you're gonna have a really bad time. It's not good. He also is like perpetually covered in warp fire, or something akin to warp fire, where he's like perpetually shrouded in flames that are like the green black fire that is associated with like warpstone, because you know Morsalib is literally made of warpstone. Yeah, but he causes people's brains to not do so hot if they get anywhere close to him, because he's literally born of warpstone. So but where like Morgur, the Gave spawn, is far more a living embodiment of physical corruption and like physical mutation. Moonclaw is kind of the opposite, and he is far more representative of mental corruption and mental mutation. So causing you to your brain to just melt, which can cause you to be engulfed by raving insanity. So you know you'll attack your allies or do other weird and bizarre things, and just completely go fucking insane, which is cool and great.
Of course.
Moonclaw is a character that people that like know their Warhammer Fantasy are really hopeful will be the legendary hero character for the Beastmen, because they all have the Chaos Moon mechanic as like one of their base campaign mechanics, which is intrinsically tied into who Moonclaw is. And he would make for an absolutely fantastic legendary hero.
Yeah, I mean that's just, it makes sense. It's already in the game, so.
Oh, he also rides his twin sibling like a mount, which is fun.
What?
Yeah, his brother is a entity known as Umberlock, and Umberlock is he's technically he's a bit of a weird case. Like he's considered he manifests physically, but in reality he is an etheric entity. So he has to be summoned into reality by his brother. But he can only be summoned if the winds of magic are blowing like really, really strong.
Interesting.
And he is particularly spooky. But yeah, Moonclaw summons his brother in, which
and rides him
Umberlock,
into battle.
yeah, Umberlock is just a big, horrifying, like, monster that has 2 heads. So he has 2 heads that stick out on side by side, and he runs on all 4s, like a big, horrible demon dog thing. And
is this a situation where the 2 heads do different things as well?
No, they are not. If they do, it is not noted what they do.
Okay.
He just has 2 heads.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's just a perk. I see.
And if, yeah, Moonclaw's big thing is, if I recall correctly, he has 1 big horn sticking out of his head. Instead of like a set of horns, he just has like a big unicorn horn looking thing.
Okay. Chat would like to know who's better, Grumlock or Gazbag? I'm assuming these are greenskins.
You can, but yes, you're correct, but I would say you cannot separate them because that no longer would make sense for what they are.
What are they?
Grumlock and Gazbag, they're a set to be technical, but they are so when the Warhammer Fantasy MMO game got made, they wanted to have a big bad for each of the factions. So, and they wanted like 1 big bad, and most of them were pretty obvious. So like for the High Elves, you got the Phoenix King Finnebar. For the Dwarfs, you got High King Thorgrim. For the Empire, you got Karl Franz. And then for the bad guys, they ran into a couple of issues at that time that they made some interesting decisions to try and fix. So for the Dark Elves, it was easy. They just went with Malekith. Problem solved.
Yeah.
But after that, they ran into what they considered to be issues. So the first thing was that for the Forces of Chaos, they wanted a Tzeentch character who would like lead their new big bad faction of the Raven Host, and they didn't want to use Egron von Horseman because he wasn't necessarily appropriate for the role or what they were imagining. Which Egron von Horseman at that time was the big bad Tzeentch character because Village the Curseling didn't exist yet. So so they created a new character called Zarkan, who was a heavily mutated worshiper of Tzeentch. He had a really cool design though. So Zarkan was like the really big bad, but he had a really cool design. And then the Greenskins, they ran into an issue of they wanted 1 character to lead the faction. So they didn't want to use the characters they already had, being like Skarsnik or Grimgor and any of those. So they created a new character that was essentially like a duo. And they were called Grumlock and Gazbag. Oh, sorry, not Zarkan. It was Chakarzanek. My bad. Was the Tzeentch champion. So Grumlock and Gazbag. Grumlock is the orc, and Gazbag is the goblin. And the whole gimmick behind them is that they were both to justify why the Greenskins would team up with the Dark Elves and the Warriors of Tzeentch, which, you know, admittedly can be a little bit of a hard sell. The idea that the writers ran with for that game was that Malekith, which Dark Elves, you know, have a lot of slaves of many different species, and some of their slaves are greenskin slaves. And so they ran with the idea of, what if Malekith had some greenskin slaves and we made those into the big faction leaders for the Orcs and Goblins players. So what they did was they told a story where Malekith basically went into his slave pens and found Grumlock and Gazbag, with Grumlock being the biggest orc that he had, and Gazbag being this really small goblin that was really well known for being clever and conniving and had a little bit of a gift of magic. And Malekith gifted the two of them these really insanely powerful magical amulets that took what abilities and powers they had and like dialed it up to a 15. So they were both insanely strong, and then he just kind of like released them into the Badlands. But the gimmick was that he could influence them through the amulets to make them pliable, so that they would be willing to work with him and Malekith and the Chaos character. So so he released the two of them into the Badlands, and they basically start kicking the crap out of any like orc bosses or other notable characters, to start rallying everyone behind them. And then they very famously went on to attack. I want to say they attacked. I can't remember if it was Carrick 8 Peaks or if it was like somewhere else. They attacked like a dwarf hold. I want to say it was Carrick 8 Peaks, but I can't remember where it was they attacked. But they attacked somewhere, and the really iconic moment from that fight is that the dwarfs basically had like this big kick-ass impenetrable wall that the greenskins couldn't get through, and Grumlock and Gazbag just like walk up to it, and Gazbag, the little shaman, conjures a spell, and it basically causes him to like, it basically just like shoots this titanically massive laser beam directly into the wall, and it just like obliterates a hole in the wall. And there's a scene of the dwarfs just looking like absolutely gobsmacked at this goblin that just like basically just did like a scene out of a sci-fi movie, laser beam burrowing through a dwarf runic wall, and the dwarf's just being like, what the absolute fuck? Because like there was nothing they could do. Yeah, it did not go well for the dwarfs in that particular fight. But they were a really fun little duo that very notably got released. They were released as a limited time miniature. So if you bought the collector's edition of Total War Warhammer, or not Total War, if you bought the collector's edition of Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning, I don't remember if they were in the collector's edition or if it might have been actually a separate thing. I think they were a separate release from Games Workshop actually, but regardless, you could buy their mini, and their mini was actually really fun. It was a really high quality metal mini. Yeah, that was, they in my opinion are probably like one of the more enduring legacy elements of Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning. Like whenever like Creative Assembly is like working on a DLC, there will inevitably be random parts of that game that like show up in the zeitgeist of the community, because the community will be like, oh, like this would be a really cool unit for the DLC, without realizing that it's rather exclusive to the MMO game and doesn't exist outside of it.
Yeah.
Like probably the most famous example is like there's a lot of really famous. One of the things they did in the MMO is that instead of just using regular Chaos Spawn, they created like Undivided Chaos Spawn, but then they created unique Chaos Spawn for each of the Dark Gods and which had always kind of existed, but they made like really fucking cool designs for each of them. So they made like the Blood Beast of Khorne, the Fireworm of Tzeentch, I forget what the Nurgle one's called, and the Celestial one. But they had these like really cool unique designs, and anytime anyone ever talks about those factions, they're like, oh, well, these should be cool DLC units, and it's like, they're just Chaos Spawn. Like they're not like actually like unique specialized creatures. They're just it's just your Chaos Spawn of Khorne, just with a unique design. It's not something actually new. What MMO though? If anyone out there is ever looking for a new MMO to try, the the private server is still active and vibrant these days, and actually just is constantly getting cool updates and stuff, and is really fun. And I would highly recommend it to anybody.
Nice.
They have a really kick-ass community.
Have seen it recommended before.
Yeah, if I wasn't playing Final Fantasy 14, I would probably be playing 4.
How's that been going for you? Been enjoying it?
Yeah, it's really good. It's like
awesome.
It's unfortunate how good it is. Like, it's one of those things that, like, I kind of wish it sucked. That way I could just be like, well, we tried it, but, you know, it was bad, and now we can, like, move on with other things. But unfortunately, it's really fun, and I'm enjoying it a lot. And it's like, this is gonna take so long. It's gonna take so long.
It's gotta consume so much of your life, yeah. I get that. So many of my friends also play it as well.
Yeah, I'm having a really good time with it, though. I just finished the first, like, big raid. Which, of course, we did it, like, the way where all the bosses died in, like, 2 hits, because most of the people that were helping me were, like, hilariously over-leveled. Because we were just... we were doing it for the story content, not, like, the
actual difficulty of the battle.
It's such a hard dungeon, but it's like, I'm just here for the lore. I'm here for the lore to get out. So let's commit war crimes real fast so I can get the story and move on.
Makes sense.
Even then, it still took like, it still took like at least an hour, I think, something like that, or like it just because there was like so much running to like get through everything, because I think it was like 12 individual stages, like 12 dungeons made up that raid. It was like, good fucking god. That is a lot of instances to have to run through. I'm so sick of Yuan Bo running through and just like sniping these 2 settlements. He could just keel over and die. I would be really appreciative.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Well, it's like, because he keeps coming down this coastline, and then when I kill him on the coastline, he'll run up through like here, I can actually draw on here. So like, he keeps trying to attack me this way, and then when I eventually beat him and force him back, he'll go this way instead. So he keeps like avoiding, and then because I'm chasing him all the way down to here to kill him, while I'm down here, he's gonna spawn a new 20 stack that's gonna start going this way. So then when I go and kill this army, he spawns another army that then starts going this way again. It's like, oh my god.
Yeah, I feel that pain. Playing Gorok's
like,
campaign with Rikarth and the Pestilence, it's just a lot.
Yeah, it's like, and I could solve it if I just stop being lazy and spawn a new army to like
just hold the pass.
Yeah, which I think I'm going to start working on that now. Because the piece of garbage just keeps being mean to me.
Might as well. Let's city.
I think I'll make a... I think I'm gonna have this guy be like a skink score army. That sounds fun.
Lizardmen taking too long to decide on something? Where have I heard that before? It's just the Lizardmen way.
We're not taking too long. We're contemplating the great plan. It's a necessary stage.
Lizardmen are a lot of things. Oh, and I love them for it.
Okay, yeah, those are acceptable losses. That's fine.
Yeah, honestly, at this point, I feel like trying to auto-resolve as many battles as possible is the optimal strat to not disconnect.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
I haven't played the ogre faction before. What changes do they need? Because I only hear people talking about they need a rework, but I don't know what they need.
Yeah, they kind of suffer from. Oh wait, did I? Oh,
2 turns.
maybe I did lose some units. I would have rather not lost. Oh, every time I live. Yeah, they suffer pretty heavily. The issue with them is that it's not that they're bad, it's just that they're boring, essentially, because a lot of their mechanics are like overly restrictive. So the main issue is that the Ogre Kingdoms have a couple of mechanics that in theory are cool, but in practice have some pretty annoying issues. So like they have the mercenary contract mechanic. And the way it's supposed to work is that you every like 10 turns you're supposed to get a set of 3 mercenary contracts from other races in the game, and basically they'll ask you like, hey, go do this thing for me and I'll give you a magic item and a bunch of money, or I'll just give you like a bunch of money and a diplomacy buff with me, or I'll give you a bunch of money and like some kind of random bonus, which in theory is cool, and like a fun mechanic. Why is Morgar the Shadowgave showing up on my coastline with a 20 stack of beastmen? What is happening?
What? Why is he there? Huh?
Fucking beastmen. Oh my god. Great. So now I'm gonna have to dedicate an army to go deal with that shit. So the problem is though, that the mercenary contracts, while fun as an idea, they're so like weirdly random, because basically what it'll be is it'll be like a faction that you're not at war with. So that's like one pretty annoying restriction out the gate, is that it'll be like a faction that's neutral towards you, or a faction that you're friends with, but usually it's like a neutral faction. And they will basically say something like, oh hey, could you run like all the way across the map to go attack like this city that I don't like? And you can get a lot of really weird crossover things that are really annoying, because a lot of the time it'll be stuff like they'll want you to attack one of your allies or someone that you have some kind of treaty with, which obviously will nuke your reliability, or they'll want you to attack something that's so insanely far away that you're just like, no, absolutely not. Like that is so hilariously not close to anything I'm dealing with. So the vast majority of the time it's not doable, because it's either something that requires you to go across the planet, or it's something that requires you to like attack somebody that you don't want to attack for completely reasonable reasons.
Gotcha.
So it's essentially kind of an unusable mechanic. And that's like the least offensive thing. The far more offensive and annoying stuff are things like the camp mechanic. So the way the Ogre Kingdoms work is that they cannot build they can only build settlements that are tier 3 or lower. They don't have major cities, they only have minor cities. But the trade-off is that they can make camps. And the way camps work is that you can essentially spawn a city anywhere you want, as long as it's not like within the reinforcement zone of already established settlement. So you can put a city anywhere you want in the world, and you can upgrade it all the way up to being tier 5. And it... Can I? I'm trying to just figure out if I can beat him. His army is very bad.
I mean, if you want a manual, we can.
I'm gonna quick save just in case it crashes.
Yeah.
I might not be able to beat him, but I can deeply, deeply wound him, so he won't be able to just run over all my shit.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah, because if we could kill like the Manticore, the giant, and then I can use the Sotek ability to like wipe out most of his little guys, that'll leave us in a much better spot. But anyway, so like the camps, the camps are a bit of a weird situation because like on one hand they're nice because they're kind of like black arcs where they have this big area of influence and they give like a ton of buffs to your armies that are within that area of influence, which is great. But and they do not have their own garrison. Their garrison is you have to build an army. So you build an army inside of the camp, just like you would recruit for a normal army. But the problem is that camps cannot move. Like once you spawn them in a singular place, they're stuck there and they can't move for any reason ever. They're just there for the rest of the time. And a lot of people understandably really hate that because it means that like if you invest really heavily in a camp, but you're now like moving on to if you would just like kind of spread them out. So if you have like one here, one here, and one here, and when that Manticore comes into range, just like shoot it until it dies.
Roger.
And then hopefully the Manticore will get ahead of the rest of his army and we can kill it first. And then after that, we need to try and kill the giant with shooting attacks.
Okay.
But anyway, so like the camps can't move, which leads to an issue of that you cannot reliably get them to like if you are fighting in an area, you build a camp, you make it tier 5, you recruit all the units for it, which can be a bit of a frustrating mechanic because it requires you to like build the appropriate recruitment building in that camp, and it also requires you to like pay the recruitment cost for those units and the upkeep. Sucks. Like now granted there are ways where you can get the upkeep reduction to like 90% or something crazy like that, to where the unit is essentially free, which like okay, yeah, that's fine. But all right, let's see if I can time this big Sotek attack. Actually, you know, it's probably gonna be better just to throw my skinks, make a wall of skinks so that I can throw a big snake at it. That'll make life a little easier.
There it is.
Everybody make a nice big line.
Oh my god. My skinks.
Alright. Sotek, save us!
Now that's a lot of damage.
Dad. Thanks, Dad. Right. Okay, good. That killed a absolute metric.
Some chariots on the back here.
Oh yeah, we're not gonna be able to do anything about that. But
yeah. Well, rest in peace.
Pretty much already spent the one thing I was gonna be able to do, but we got some good mileage out of it, so that's the important thing.
Nice.
But anyway, so yeah, so the camps. The biggest thing is that they can't move because like it takes so much investment and effort to make a tier 5 camp with like a full garrison, and it takes a lot of turns. And then the issue is, okay, once you've won that particular like engagement, like you've won the battle for that area, now you've got this massive camp that just sits there and doesn't do anything the rest of the campaign.
Yeah, right. You just have to disband it.
Take it with you. Well, yeah, you could disband it, but that means you lose all like the buildings and everything, and that's the only way that you can recruit units that are above tier like 3. but you have to like build a new camp in the new area you're going to. And it feels a little ridiculous because the whole concept of the ogre camps in the lore is that they're nomadic. So they like move around depending, like following the various like herds and other creatures.
Yeah.
So what a lot of people really, really want, and I also agree with and really want, is the idea that it shouldn't be that the camp should be able to move either just like Black Arcs do, where they could just move, or they should be able to move like every once in a while. So like maybe like once every 5 turns, or they have like a move ability where they can move, but it has like a cooldown for a certain amount of turns. And like as you go through the tech tree, you can like make the cooldown shorter and shorter. So like that, so that's one big issue, is that the camps require a ton of investment, but they can't move, so you can't like make a favorite camp that then follows you around, so it's kind of like a feels bad man situation.
Yeah.
And the other issue is that if the camp doesn't have like a massive, really well designed 20 stack in it, it's really easy for the AI to kind of sneak up on them and destroy them, which causes you to lose a lot of investment, which also is really feel bad. So, and the ogres have some other notable issues as well. Like they're supposed to have access to 4 lores of magic, but they only have 2 lores of magic.
Is it just not added to the game?
Well, they just haven't added those particular wits. They're supposed to have access, in addition to the 2 lores they already have. They're supposed to have access to the lore of death and the lore of heavens, and they do not have access to either of those for some reason.
Okay.
And then in addition to that, there is supposed to be in addition to that, their tech tree is just really bad. Like they have a Garbo tech tree.
I see.
But that is, I would say that's most people's issue with the ogres, and there are ways around them, which it kind of leans into the issue of that, like, probably not going to be a popular thing for me to say, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Oh boy.
Of that there are, I do find that a lot of people sometimes complain about mechanics that have built-in ways to deal with them, but people, I say this with love, are stupid and don't like read the tooltips and everything, so they don't understand that there are ways to deal with certain kinds of issues. And instead of just, you know, like doing what you're supposed to do to deal with the issue, they just complain about it.
Damn.
So like a good example is like, which somebody brought this up in the chat as well, is that like the Ogre Kingdoms, a lot of people hate that the camps like don't move, and because they're like, oh, I have to like recruit an army where the camp is and then go out from there, so my armies always have to start and stop in like super inconvenient places, when the ogres do have a built-in system where they can spend their unique resource to make their global recruitment timer like insanely short, so that you can basically recruit an army anywhere you want in the world really, really fast. But at the same time, I do see the strong counter argument there that I don't think ogres have much of a reduction to global recruitment cost, so it's still like super expensive to do that, though ogres traditionally can make a fuck ton of money once they have a decent number of settlements. They have a really strong economy if they get up and running. But so yeah, it just depends. A lot of people just don't like the way they play right now. And there are definitely aspects of it that I see big issues. Like I think the mercenary contract system is just garbage, and definitely needs like a severe overhaul, because right now it's like if you're not going out of your way to fulfill contracts, it's very, very rare that you'll get to actually complete any of them. They're unnecessarily difficult to do, due to like how far you have to
sounds like it
travel, and the way it determines like what's a viable target is also very odd, because it's like, oh hey, won't you attack your ally so that you can make like 5,000 gold? And it's like, no. No, yeah, it's like, no, the penalties are like way too high for that. So there's all that nonsense going on. And I do think the camps should have the ability to relocate, in my honest opinion. Like I said, I would be totally fine with it if it was like they could only relocate every once in a while, as opposed to like I don't think they necessarily need to be like black arcs, because if you make them like black arcs, then you're just making Ogre Kingdoms a horde army. Which, I mean, you could do that. I wouldn't be upset if they were like, okay, Ogre Kingdoms are a horde now. I would just be like, oh, okay. But they definitely got to do something there.
Oh my god. Oh, jeez, that's a feels bad moment, man. Critical failure on both my heroes. Now they're dead.
Oh, yeah, that's always a big fucking bummer. That being said, when I say horde faction, I don't mean like true horde like the old days. I don't think we should ever have those ever again. I mean horde in the sense that every Ogre Kingdoms character is a camp. Kind of like the specialist Vampire Coast characters.
Like the old days, as in like the how Archaon used
like
to work in Warhammer 1.
Like, yeah, like the old days, like it's impossible for you to take any settlements. Old days. I do not think those were good. I think that was generally considered a bad move.
Yeah.
I'm so close to wiping out the Bretonnians. Ugh.
They've been asking me for peace for so many turns now.
I mean, you can accept if you want. It's not going to stop me from beating them to death.
I don't know. For 600 gold, we can eradicate them.
Well, just because you have peace with them doesn't mean I'm going to have peace with them. So if I were you, I would just take their money, because you could just be like, yeah, sure, I'll have peace with you. Meanwhile, your ally is just like mugging them.
Chat wants to know what your experience was like and how different it was when you were playing Storms of Chaos compared to the End Times.
They were very, very different experiences. Like, they're not really comparable, to be honest. So for those that don't know, the Storm of Chaos is often referred to as like the first attempt at the End Times, but that's not really true, because I mean the whole gimmick is that the End Times was obviously designed to be the end of the setting. Like the whole idea behind the End Times was that it was the end of the world. Like the Warhammer Fantasy Universe was ending. Period. It was going to die. Like no ifs, ands, or buts. The story was wrapping up, kiddos. But Games Workshop, whereas the Storm of Chaos very explicitly was not the End Times. It was a summer campaign. So Games Workshop used to host summer events every year that it would either be like Warhammer Fantasy or Warhammer 40k or Wartime or whatever setting they were doing it in. They would do like a special event where they would release like a really, really small book. Like there were these little like paperback magazines almost that would just have like some basic lore, basic rules, just all the little tidbits you need to know. And you would get to pick your faction. And for the way they did it for the Storm of Chaos was that this was in the this was in like the early to mid 2000s, like 2003 or 2000. No, it was more like 2006, I think. but basically you would decide what faction you wanted to play, and you could go to your local hobby store, and they were hosting, each of your local hobby stores would be hosting the Albion, or I was thinking Albion, but Storm of Chaos, which had like a nice thick book to it. I was thinking Albion when I thought the little tiny books, but the Storm of Chaos actually had a pretty decent, like, it was basically the size of a regular army book. But Storm of Chaos was that you'd go to your local hobby stores. I think it actually had to be,
You may touch me.
I think any hobby store could register to report results, but they tended to want you to go to an actual Games Workshop. But basically you would go to a store and you would play battles between certain factions. And then you could go to the online website, the Games Workshop, or the Storm of Chaos webpage, and from your hobby store, they would have like a code where you could log in and report your results. So like if I was playing Lizardmen against a Dark Elf player, then after we were done, we could go walk over to the computer at my Games Workshop, log on to the website, and we tell like the guy working the counter, like, hey, like we just played a game and I won, and yada yada yada. And they'd be like, okay, and they'd walk over to the computer and they'd enter the information. And basically for the Storm of Chaos, they were pooling all of the information together to determine what factions won. So what ended up happening was that the winners of the various campaigns was being determined by essentially popularity, because it was by like people submitting results. If I remember correctly, they actually had, if I remember correctly, I'm not actually sure you had to log on to the website, now that I think about it. If I remember correct, I think you could just get on your home PC and like submit your results manually.
What? Then yeah, what's the point? It's just a popularity contest then.
Yeah, which led to a popularity contest issue. Because if I remember right, because I was young, I was little when Storm of Chaos happened. And if I remember right, I think I remember getting on my home PC and just spam posting Lizardmen results.
Absolutely based.
Yeah, but anyway, it was a mess because of like it was more about a popularity contest than anything. But they had a website tracker that had like bars showing like which factions were winning, and there were some good aspects and some bad aspects. Like one of the things that was really cool about it was that every single race was involved, and it was like a global campaign, in universe and in reality. But in universe, it was particularly cool because it was like, depending on what faction you were playing, you were participating in a different conflict. So like the Lizardmen, if you were playing Lizardmen or Dark Elves, you were facing off against one another, because the Dark Elves were the specialist Cult of Pleasure faction attacking Lustria in the hopes of like capturing some Slawn and stealing Lizardmen artifacts and yada yada yada. If you were playing the Lizardmen, your goal was to defend. If you played Tomb Kings or Greenskins, their campaigns mostly revolved around fighting each other, because Cetra the Imperishable was leading an invasion of the Badlands to reclaim a bunch of ancient territory that used to belong to Nehakara. So the Tomb King players were trying to score lots of victories against the Greenskin players, and the Greenskins were either holding off. If you were playing regular Greenskins, you were mostly holding off Cetra, but you could also play Grimgor Ironhide's Specialist Army to get some like various bonuses, or to face off against like the Hordes of Chaos and all this stuff. So like there were a bunch of different theaters of war, and I want to say it was every like 2 to 3 weeks. I want to say it was maybe every week or every 2 weeks. Games Workshop, I don't remember who the writer was, but they had somebody on staff who would basically go onto the website and would write like a little lore blurb about like what had happened with that past week. So there was a lot of actually really fun lore being written about like how all the factions were doing and how they were dealing with these like various invasions and assault and stuff that was meant to reflect the results of the various polls. So like you'd like I remember there was a week where like the High Elves did like exceptionally well against like Warriors of Chaos, or against just like the combined forces of Chaos. So there was this really cool article that talked about how like the Empire was fighting a battle that was going really poorly for them near like Eringrad or Marienburg. I don't remember exactly which coastal city it was, but near a coastal city. And so there was this really cool scene where like it talks about like all of a sudden there's like this big explosion of magic, and the Chaos Hordes look to the ocean where all these ships like come up and throw down all the ramparts, and this army of elves in armor that's like so brilliant and shining that it's like blinding to the Warriors of Chaos, and they can't even see them because the sun's reflecting off all of the stuff of the glittering host as all these high elves like disembark, and the swordmasters start like chopping into all these Warriors of Chaos, and Teclis walks off the ship and just starts like blowing up a bunch of Zinch wizards and shit. And it's like, it was really fun. So there was like a lot of really cool little lore blurbs that came out during that time. But of course, very infamously, it ran into the really big issue of, because a lot of the results were based on actual battles, especially because a lot of the really important battles, to prevent some of the brigading, they eventually pivoted to like, you had to do the battles in the stores. And the results had to be reported by like official employees instead of just like random children at home like me. But even then, the problem was that they would host all these big events, and the whole idea of the Storm of Chaos is supposed to be that Chaos was the big bad, and that Chaos was supposed to be like sweeping everyone before it. And lo and behold, because of the rules of 6th edition, Chaos was getting its ass kicked. I mean, just Chaos was just getting absolutely brutalized by everybody else. So Chaos was just getting the shit kicked out of it, and it made the situation really awkward because Chaos was getting just annihilated in all of the polls, but Games Workshop didn't want Chaos to just lose, so they kind of wrapped up the event early, and the story went from being like a genuinely fun, interesting story that you could follow along with and like kind of know what was going to happen based on like how the results were going, to there was like a really sudden pivot of like, oh, and Chaos starts like winning and pushing everyone back and like is so powerful and unstoppable and yada yada, and everyone was like, that's not right. That's not what happened. And that led to the really goofy ending of it, where they tried to make Chaos feel like a big bad guy out of absolutely nowhere, despite the fact that Archaon was getting like trampled. And it led to the really goofy rushed ending of like Archaon attacks Middenheim but doesn't actually get into the city at all, and then he's about to win and like he beats Volten, who is like the Sigmar reborn. Like he beats him in a duel and he's like about to be really cool and stuff, and then Grimgor Ironhide just runs up behind him and kicks the shit out of him. And Archaon, who had been like built up in the background for like a really long time by that point, Archaon had existed as a character for years, just gets the crap beat out of him, and everyone was like, oh, okay, so Archaon's gonna like die, or the Dark Gods are gonna like turn him into a Chaos Spawn for failing. And instead he just like teleports to the realm of chaos. Like he just teleports to safety and there's no like consequences or repercussions. And then like the vampire counts reveal themselves and are like, oh, look at this convenient giant army of like everybody dead that we can resurrect. And everyone's like, oh my god, there's like, now there's gonna be like this huge like vampire count invasion, and like we're gonna get to see the vampire counts be the baddies. And Volkmar the Grim, who had gone from being, who had been killed by Archaon, then resurrected by Be'lakor and crucified on a banner as like a living, like tortured man, just chained up to a stick as Bellacor's like battle standard. Like during the final battle, Volkmar like rips himself off the banner and just starts kicking the shit out of demons using like the chains that were binding him to the standard before then, which was like, oh, okay, like I don't know why he didn't do that the first time, but okay, whatever. But like Volkmar like walks up to the walls and is like, not only am I back from the dead, so I'm Grand Theogenist again, even though y'all replaced me, but like no, I'm in charge again. Also, Manfred, like the last time you attacked an Empire city, that Grand Theogenist killed your dad. So, like, how about you chew on that for a second?
Dang.
Which Manfred should have responded by being like, "Okay, bet I just won't come up there and enjoy being like sieged by millions of dead people for like months until you all starve to death." But instead, Manfred was like, He's got a point, and Manfred just retreats to Sylvania, which was like, what?
Well, it's Manfred. Yeah, he does Manfred things when the writers want him to.
So it was a mess. Whereas the End Times was completely different because the community didn't get any say in what happened. Like, and that has been the standard since, which I actually think works better. Because it just lets them tell a story that they want to tell, and then we all move on with our lives.
Yeah.
But the thing about the End Times that was particularly bad was not only was the writing just terrible, but Games Workshop did not let anybody know what the End Times actually was until we were pretty far in it. Because they didn't come out and say like, oh hey, we're gonna end the setting. Like this is like the swan song for Warhammer Fantasy. Like buy what minis you want to buy, do all the stuff you want to do, but we're wrapping up because they knew everyone was going to be like fucking furious, and you know not buy stuff. So they just walked out and were like, "Look, new summer campaign." Everyone was like, "Oh, cool, a summer campaign," and then just kind of kept going. And especially because like the first book was like amazing. Like the first book, Nagash was a really good book. Like it had a couple issues, but for the most part, Nagash was like an 8 out of 10. Like it was a super duper good campaign book. And then Glotkin came out and everyone was like, okay, this is like worse. This is like a lot worse and a lot smaller, but okay. And then the third book was really bad. Pain was fucking terrible. And that's when everyone started getting really suspicious because that's when Games Workshop, a lot of the leaks started coming out on like Warpforge and some other various websites at the time, like forums at the time, about like, no, this isn't like a summer campaign. This is like the actual death of fantasy, which everyone refused to believe for like a good while because it seemed impossible. Like, how could they possibly end Warhammer Fantasy? It's like the OG.
Yeah.
But I don't remember exactly when everybody figured it out. I want to say it was maybe with like Thankful that everyone kind of realized what was going on and people started getting like really, really angry. Because it was like with book 1 Nagash and the Glotkin, which was book 2, like it was virtually impossible to get your hands on a copy. If you were not really, really fast. Like I pre-ordered my Nagash copy, so I was able to get it. And then Glotkin, I actually missed the initial purchase because I was a poor college student, so I couldn't afford it. And it was like, it was such a pain in the ass to get my hands on a copy of Glotkin. Like I had to hunt around so many local hobby stores before I finally found somebody in like a completely different city that had a single copy left. And the guy was nice enough over the phone that he not only let me buy it, but also let me pay for him to ship it to me. Because he was like, it was too far away for me to drive. And like, so I had to jump through a whole bunch of hoops to get my hands on a copy. And then Pain, word got out pretty quick how bad it was, like how bad the writing and everything was. So that one sold really fast initially, but then it was pretty easy to find copies. And then from that point forward, you could find copies like hilariously easy. Like Thankful and Archaon were really easy to get. because a lot of people figured out what was going on by that point. So you had people like just refusing to buy anymore, or like panic selling their armies, understandably, or doing things like there was the really infamous dude that burned his Dark Elf army on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
Which in retrospect, what a dumbass. But at the time, everybody made fun of him. And I think it was still completely proper to make fun of him, because like, way to show that multi-million pound company by burning your own property. Yeah, you sure showed them, man. you told them what for.
Yeah.
Because if that guy had just waited, like, he could have sold his army for so much money. Like, he could have sold his army for an absolute metric fuck ton. Because, like, there are so many people that love collecting the old fantasy stuff.
I mean, at the very least, if he had waited a little bit, then he could have sold it when they brought back Warhammer Fantasy. At the very least,
exactly.
keep it as a collectible or something, yeah.
Yeah,
now you just
or
lose that
like,
investment.
Yeah, it's like he could have sold it, or he could have just kept it as like a collection piece, or like if he was just really determined to get rid of it really fast, he could have given it away to like someone at his local hobby store, or like a kid that was just starting or something. Like, burning it was so fucking stupid. I'm still mad about that. It was such a waste. Why would he do that? It's so much money to waste. Because when nerds get angry, to put it really bluntly, as one of them, they tend to make really stupid, bad decisions. Nerd rage is like a particular form of mental illness.
All right, oh fine, Yuanbo, give me that 1,000. I kind of need money. Oh yeah, true.
Oh yeah, yeah. I actually might get peace with Yuanbo this upcoming turn as well. Like, I think I might try and take back a full province from him. But once I have that province, I think I might get peace with him for a little bit, so I could focus on other affairs.
Chat is reminding me that yeah, it's a little bit is 9 years. But I mean, like, still, like, destroying your own property in order to protest against the company doesn't really do much.
Oh no, it does nothing. It does absolutely nothing. But I mean, like, even if you look at it from the idea of like, oh, you know, he didn't know that fantasy was going to come back. Like, there are a lot of collectors who just wanted Warhammer Fantasy armies, like, immediately after the end times, because there were a lot of minis that were like discontinued. For whatever, you know, various reasons, because like they weren't supported by like the Age of Sigmar ranges, and in those cases, like, he still could have made absolute bank. Okay, I'm going to lay siege to the city, because if I can take this, then I can get peace with him and not deal with him for a while.
Nice.
Which would be very nice. Have you thought about doing any tabletop stuff ever? Like, I know where you live, it's like painfully expensive, so I would not recommend it, but
yeah. I don't have enough income currently to even think about getting into that. I feel like the most I would ever do is probably like get one model that I really, really enjoy and put it as like a piece on my desk or something. As like a small painting project that I could do for a stream. That's probably the most I would do.
I have a original Genuine Mini that is painted in like the classic color scheme, that I use as a display piece instead of, like, I would never use it in a tabletop game because it's like, it's too fancy for that.
And Tabletop Simulator is also an option. I paid too much
money for that to be a display piece. For that to be a in-game piece.
Yeah.
I don't want some person to get their grumpy paws all over it.
Especially the nerds. Ugh.
Here, let's see. Let's put you in charge of Big Daddy here, and if you will just go forward and just kill everything in front of you, that'd be great.
Yeah, I can do that.
After smashing that gate open.
The one right in front of us?
Yeah, that's going to be our entry route.
Cool beans.
Actually, you know what? Instead of that gate, let's do this one over here.
Okay. Because there's no tower over here. Boom.
Well, it's like I'm not so much worried about the towers as I am about that if we go in that other way, because there's like a bunch of elevation right there and like stairs and stuff. It makes it, the AI has like a lot more places they can just kind of casually sit, and it makes them a little annoying to get to.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been in that situation.
If you would be so kind, just go knock on the door.
Yeah, well, I don't really have any knock-knock jokes, but I'll try my best.
Alright, I'm waiting.
And by many, I'll say none. I don't have anything good. It's probably best for me to not tarnish my own name.
Well,
I'll leave the bad jokes for my friends to do. Well, what is your best knock-knock joke?
I don't even remember the last time I told a knock-knock joke. A lot of my jokes are like most of my jokes are like lewd or like puns.
Oh no, not the puns.
Like, it's funny. I advertise myself as someone that deeply hates puns, but I do appreciate them. I don't like them as much as my sister does, though. My sister fucking loves puns, which I disapprove of immensely, but it is what it is.
All right. I mean, we have a lot of pun masters in my stream chats usually. What's a pun that you enjoyed a lot recently, or like your most favorite?
I can tell you my sister's favorite.
Okay.
God, I'm trying to remember what the setup is. I remember what the punchline is. I'm trying to remember the setup. Oh my good lord! I have no idea what the setup is. I just realized. I know the punchline is it's an Eye of the Beekeeper joke, but I don't remember what the setup is.
I feel like puns are the best when it's like a part of the natural conversation that's currently happening and somebody just brings it up.
Yes, I agree. That being said, like, as a Lizardmen player, I feel like I'm contractually obligated to hate puns because Games Workshop just went too far and they overdid it. Yeah, like they added way too much salt to that particular meal.
I mean, the Lizardmen are just special, man. And sometimes you run out of names to name your Lizardmen, so.
No. Don't defend them. They didn't even try. Like, I realize that a lot of the names are like I can forgive them, like back in the 80s when they didn't have like good internet access and stuff. Mm-hmm. But like in the 2000s and stuff, they could have just done a quick Google and come up with some not-less names. It would not have been that hard.
Just straight up like, generator for fantasy names, easy.
Yeah, like Lord Croak did not need to be still named Lord Croak anymore. Like, that could have been a part of his name, but like realistically his name should be like considerably longer than that. Like, should have multiple more syllables.
I mean, keep it nice and short.
That's actually something I've done a bit for like Andy for a thing in like some free time, is like I've been going through some of the Lizardmen characters, especially the Slon, like changing their names to like keep the name relatively similar so that it's still identifiably like the same character, but it's no longer a pun, to make the name like an actual name. So like I'd have to look up what I changed it to, but like I changed one for a project thing that I was doing, like because there's like a really famous Slon Lord who's really important to a little thing. But his name is Lord Chili Pepper. but it's spelled CH. Instead of CH, it's it's XH. Other than that, it's spelled exactly how you think it would be.
Oh my god.
It's terrible. So I went in and changed his name. I'll have to look up what I changed it to here in a second. But like, I've been trying to make some of their names not absolute fucking garbage.
Maybe it's just me being a noob, but sometimes I feel like the smaller scale battles in Total War are a lot more fun than the large scale ones. Because there's...
I agree, because I can actually like pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's that aspect. I also feel like there's more clear tactics going on, like, oh, now I know I can move this one squad around and then hit them from the side or the back, do some classic hammer and anvil. Maybe set up some chevrons.
Like I've watched, like, I really enjoy watching like Turin's tournaments. Like, I think Turin has a tournament today. He has one of his faction wars.
Oh
and,
yeah,
like, I really enjoy watching those. And like, but the thing that's like really key to me is that the multiplayer games I think are so much fun to watch because they have really limited armies sizes. Like, they're not these like absolutely fucking massive monolithic 20 stacks fighting one another. Like, I genuinely do not enjoy oftentimes when the game ends up having like just gigantic armies, because it's so fucking difficult to have like any idea what's going on.
Yeah. Like, so many units just running off in random directions and trying to keep track of all of them. And the formations break, like no matter how good you set it up.
Yeah, and it's like at that point you're often having to do stuff like in order for the game to like to be playable, because especially because like a lot of people give the AI a lot of shit, because granted it does do really weird, bizarre, goofy nonsense frequently.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time it's like if you play the AI and you're like doing like 20 stacks versus 20 stacks, you have to rely on like these really stupid cheese tactics that are, at least in my opinion, not fun, because like you're basically just like doing everything you can to exploit the AI and trick it into like doing stupid shit.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't work. Because if it does work, like, you can get so easily overwhelmed, because it can absolutely micro 20 units at once.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Very easily. Whereas I cannot.
If only. They should break, right? Or do they have unbreakable units?
I'm just I've got things fast forwarding because I'm trying to get some additional heals out of my rev engine.
I see. Okay, gotcha.
There's a lot of baddies in this particular area. I'm just trying to make sure my Waddle isn't gonna die.
Chat would like to know what is good and interesting about Bretonia, because apparently, well, Bretonia gets a lot of hate from a lot of people. Is there anything redeeming about them?
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool shit about Bretonia. Bretonia is in a bit of a unique circumstance, because what makes Bretonia a bit weird and unique is that most factions in Warhammer Fantasy got 7 editions. Well, that's not true, but like they got a 7th edition book, which was, with the exception of Bretonia, which was really important because 7th edition was was probably the most balanced edition when it came to Games Workshop landing a good balance between seriousness and like really goofy, campy bullshit. Because like if you go back to like 5th edition Warhammer Fantasy, everything was really campy and over the top and goofy as fuck, but like there were some fun elements, but a lot of it was very silly. And then 6th edition kind of did the exact opposite, where 6th edition like flipped around on its head and made everything like super fucking grimdark. Oh, did it break?
No.
Good grief. Good grief.
Creative Assembly servers, please.
Yeah, I feel like this most recent patch is worse than it has been in a hot minute.
Well, I mean, I guess we can we can talk about Bretonia, then kind of wrap things up there.
Yeah, I guess that's fine. But like, so Bretonia, the issue with them is 6th edition was really, really goofy. Sorry, not goofy, but like really grimdark.
Yeah.
A lot. 6th edition was dark, and that's because it was really heavily influenced by Mordheim, which Mordheim was really and truly an no, brother Red. We are using a VPN. That's the sad thing.
Yeah.
Like, we are using a VPN.
It would be so much worse without it.
It would be so much worse without it, yeah. But Mordheim took all of Warhammer into a really different direction. Like, a lot of what 40k became, where people were like, oh, I love when 40k is like just the grimdark, nastiest shit. That comes from Mordheim. Mordheim was like the thing that really changed the face of everything Warhammer.
Okay.
So when 6th edition Warhammer Fantasy came out, it was really heavily influenced by that style. So everything was made really grimdark, which the core about like grimdark in that sense is that the setting is meant to be very dark and hopeless, and just like what humor there is often comes from like how bad things are. And so like, if you go read all the 6th edition books, it made the Warhammer world just like suck. Like it just sucked. It was a terrible, filthy, dirty, garbage place where everything was bad and everyone was suffering, and it was just hot shit. Like, man, can't wait till this world blows up, because like, man, it sucks. And then when 7th edition rolled around, Games Workshop had a bit of a pivot, and they changed to make it where instead of like really leaning into a lot of the grimdark elements like 40k did until relatively recently, fantasy went in a much brighter direction, where 7th and 8th edition, or 7th edition in particular, started leaning much more heavily into, okay, things can be bad, but there's a lot of good. Like, there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of, I wouldn't really describe it as grimdark at all, because there's a lot of like implied good things, and there's hope, and there's noble elements, and things are not all bad. And Bretonia, because they missed out on that particular advancement, so they didn't get a 7th edition book. They got their 6th edition book, and that was it. They didn't get a book again for well, actually, Bretonia got a 5th edition book and a 6th edition book, and they didn't get anything else. So because they didn't get a 7th edition book and they were just left with their 6th edition book, it led to two main issues. The first was that their 6th edition book was so over the top, in that like everything is described as just being fucking garbage. Like, being a peasant is just the worst thing in the universe. It's just garbage. You're subhuman. You're treated like absolute dirt, and all the peasants are like deformed and malnutritioned and like warped and have like all these weird problems, and it's just awful. And the knights are all pompous, evil assholes, and Bretonia is just like the worst place in the universe. And this was compounded by the fact that because they also didn't get any update books, when all the other races got their 7th and 8th edition books, whenever you read an army book, you have to take certain elements of it with grains of salt, because the writer of the book will very much usually treat it as like, this is the greatest race ever, and they're the most powerful and cool and awesome, and they're super shiny, win every fight, and they're super awesome. One is just because like it's supposed to advertise the faction, so you know, you
Oh
want to
well,
advertise
yeah.
the faction.
Obviously, you want to sell your faction, yeah.
Yeah, and you want to make them super cool. So, but the way they do that is by showing that book's faction kicking the crap out of everybody else. But this leads to a weird problem where, because they didn't get an update book, 7th and 8th edition feature the Bretonnians getting the absolute shit beat out of them by like everybody.
Oh no!
Like the Empire, the Skaven, Greenskins, Dark Elves, High Elves, Wood Elves.
It just became the punching bag for everybody. What the hell,
just
man?
Everybody is just like clowning on them and just beating the tar out of them constantly, and they just never got a new book. So not only did their own book paint them in a really negative light because it was a grimdark edition, but then all of the following books made them look like hot garbage as well because they were just getting wailed on. So all of that compounded to make Bretonnia look like an absolute joke. But when you really like dive into like the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay book, which is called Knights of the Grail, and especially like a lot of the Black Library books, but especially like the old world stuff, Bretonnia is so much better, and is like a really cool faction. And there are some elements that of what existed in 6th edition that just didn't make sense that in the old world have been fixed, which is really nice. So like a really good example is that back in 6th edition, because the world was supposed to be grimdark and garbage and horrible, the writers behind Bretonnia were like, okay, well this is like a knight faction that's very like based on martial knighthood in our world and like the Middle Ages and stuff. So we're gonna make the Bretonnians like really backwards. They're gonna be like really sexist, and they're gonna be like really like just all these other nasty things. But like when you look at the lore, like especially the element of like, oh yeah, like women in Bretonnian society don't get to do a lot, and like it sucks. Like it just doesn't make sense. And when you read the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay book that came out at the time, which was for 6th edition, which is Knights of the Grail, there's actually a segment in the front of the book that's like, okay, so because of the way Bretonnia lore is written, the Bretonnians for like just some reason are just really horrible people, and they're like really sexist, so you're not allowed to be a woman in a lot of these careers we're going to provide. But like just ignore that. It's just like do what you want, because there's like been really famous characters like, you know, Rapunz de Lyonesse, who like was like one of the most legendary knights of all time and a savior of Bretonnia, and is a lady who went on to be a duke. Like she became the Duke of Lyonesse because she was given the dukedom by the king that was elected after she killed the big bad chaos lord Kargan the Blighted, I think, and saved all of Bretonnia. And it's like you figure that with them having like the Lady of the Lake, who the Lady of the Lake doesn't have any strictures about knights having to be dudes.
Yeah.
You'd figure that with the Lady of the Lake, female knights would be a really normal thing. And it's like, and even if that's not the case, after the whole Rapunz incident, you figure the Bretonnians would have been like, all right,
maybe there's something there.
Yeah, maybe,
yeah.
So that was always like a really weird thing that was very unnecessary, because within the universe it didn't make sense. It was like a holdover from our universe, where from our universe there were like cultural reasons and like all this stuff of why women weren't knights. So the old world, one of the really good things that they did is they went back and fixed it, and were like, nope, like literally anybody could be a knight as long as they're noble. Like peasants, there are some peasants that have been like upgraded to being knights, but generally peasants are not knights because that is not their role within society. And they also went back and re-examined the relationship between the peasantry and the knights, which in the old book, and the thing that gets memed on a lot, is that, oh, the Bretonnian knights are like super big assholes and they're dicks and they're horrible, and they treat the peasantry like less than human and garbage and stuff. And that was the case because of the grimdark nature of the book. But if you read between the lines and look at like the updated stuff, what it's really supposed to be is it's actually an interesting relationship that does have classist aspects. But the thing about the Bretonnian knights is the reason that the peasants are peasants and they're not allowed to be knights is because the Bretonnians believe there's essentially like a mandate of heaven type situation where, as a knight, your responsibility is to the peasantry. So like the reason that they don't fight is because they're supposed to take care of you while you fight their battles for them. So the laws of chivalry, which are not just the law, but are also a religious law that are reinforced by Grail Knights and damsels, which are all over the place, are supposed to be that, like, as Bretonnians, you defend the weak from the strong and the corrupt and the monstrous. And so the aspect that there would be like the average knight would be super cruel to peasants doesn't work with the pre-established lore of that the peasants are actually supposed to be treated relatively well and supposed to be protected, because without them, Bretonnia will literally just fall apart. And the chivalric code is really specific on how peasants are supposed to be treated, and that, you know, they're not supposed to be treated necessarily great, but they're not supposed to be like treated horribly. They are supposed to be treated relatively well. And even in the grimdark setting, this was reinforced with like King Lewin, where King Lewin is like a paragon, and he takes court with peasants and like deals with a lot of the issues of their wrongdoing. And the Wolfrip tried to lean more into this with like the Hemeralds, being that there was like an order of rangers made up mostly of peasants, but also of nobles and even the occasional Grail Knight who hunted down corrupt nobles and corrupt knights who were not upholding laws of chivalry and assassinating them by like shooting them with longbows, or like Grail Knights would challenge and kill them because they were violating that contract between the peasantry and the knights, which is interesting. But like you have other things where like Bretonnia, they're like, oh yeah, they're so backwards and stupid and stuff, and yet they have the strongest navy in the old world. Like they have the most powerful navy because they hilariously realize that in their chivalric code and the laws of chivalric warfare, they realized that there was a loophole where the loophole essentially states that, like, oh yeah, knights can't like use ranged weapons or anything, which is why peasants use bows and peasants use the trebuchets and everything, because they're allowed to. But basically someone along the coastline put two and two together and realized that if you had ships entirely crewed by non-knights, that they could use literally anything. They could wield war completely unchivalrically and it would be fine. And since knights can't realistically, you know, go to war on boats and ride their horses across the water because they'll drown, they decided to just throw the laws of chivalry in the dumpster, because they were like, okay, these aren't useful, and armed their ships with as many cannons as they could fucking fit on them. So they have these absolutely massive galleons that have like tons of cannons and are absolutely devastating. And to make things even more hilarious, that they're like, all right, yeah, they're allowed to use whatever weapons are necessary, but we're also going to have them defended by squadrons of Pegasus Knights, many of whom are if it's like a particularly important trade vessel, will be Royal Pegasus Knights, which means they'll essentially be Grail Knights. So you have these vessels that have like 40 to 80 to sometimes hundreds of cannons, fully crewed by very experienced Bretonnian sailors, that are also guarded by entire squadrons of Pegasus Knights and the occasional Hippogriff Knight, some of which are fucking Grail Knights, which are demigods.
Yeah, that's a scary navy to face off against for
like
pretty much everybody.
Awesome navy, but it's like I said, because they didn't get their own books outside of like 6th edition. If you only read the 7th edition books, which is a lot of what like Total War is based on, or a lot of like the modern knowledge of Warhammer is based on, the Bretonnians are just there to get the shit kicked out of them constantly. Like realistically, they're much better at defending themselves than a lot of people think they are. But you just don't get to see it that much because they missed out on a lot of the bonus books.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, because it's just a narrative that has been pushed, so people believe it to be so, even though it's not really that way.
They're very easy to meme on because like it's
I mean,
very painfully obvious that the British writers of the 90s took a lot of inspiration from Monty Python to make aspects of Bretonia, and they were not, and like especially old GW, just they weren't inspired by material, they just flat out stole material. And treated it like their own because it was a lot harder to sue people for copyright back then, like globally. So they just stole a massive amount of material from other people and writers. Like if you ever go read Michael Moorcock's books, you will find so much of Warhammer Fantasy and 40k. To be frank, you'll find so much Warhammer Fantasy and 40k in Michael Moorcock's books that you'll look and be like, "Wow, Games Workshop are hacks." Like so much of this. In that, like, the entire concept of chaos and elves, dark elves, Eldar, dark Eldar, like, all of that is ripped just straight from Michael Moorcock. It's not even subtle. And then, you know, they stole a lot from Tolkien. They stole a lot from Dune. But, like, yeah, Bretonia is literally just, okay, a lot of, like, original Arthurian legend came from the French. And the French were really, like, strong proponents of chivalric writings, and they really liked writing about Arthurian legend. And also Monty Python has a lot of really funny French bits, so what if we took those three things and we made a faction out of it? There you go, you got Bretonia.
Yeah, just understandable in the position they're in. I guess you just gotta open up your mind a little bit and see them for what they are.
And a lot, you know, some stuff isn't their fault. Like, one of the biggest jokes, you know, obviously is the whole thing of like, oh, the Bretonians' god is just an elf in disguise. But like, you have a whole thing where Games Workshop themselves fucked up what god was supposed to be the Lady of the Lake, because in the end times, for some stupid fucking reason, they were like, oh, it's Lilith, when no, it's supposed to be Ladriel, who's a completely different god. But Games Workshop was the writer at the time was like, no, it's Lilith is secretly, it was the Lady of the Lake is secretly Ladriel, who is secretly Lilith, which would mean that Lilith was pretending to be, I think, her own mother this entire time, and like none of the other gods knew about it, which doesn't make any fucking sense and is stupid.
I'm a dude playing a dude playing another dude. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, basically that author just fucked up, to put it simply. And the thing about it is that everyone likes to joke like, oh, the Bretonians are so stupid because they worship an elf, and it's like, well, I mean, if you want to be super technical about it, there is like a lot of super strong evidence that nearly all of the human gods are just elf gods. Just the humans like give them different names, but other than that, they're like the exact same god. Like Mathlan and Manon are the same god. Like it feels like an extreme stretch to suggest that they're different gods. And it's like Varena is very likely to be Hoeth under a certain guise. And it's not like the gods intentionally deceiving humans, but it's like a lot of humanity that
just
came
perception
across.
Yeah,
Well, it's like a lot of humans, the way modern human culture in the old world got set up is that a bunch of humans migrated from the east into what we know as the old world. And most of them moved in after the elves had already been kicked out by the dwarfs. So all these humans moved in and they set up a lot of their settlements in elven ruins. And went within and among the elven ruins,
you'd be influenced. Okay.
Yeah, they were heavily influenced by what the elves had left behind, and they interpreted a lot of like the elven god statues as their own gods, or like they would see like elven writings and would take like what they could understand about it and co-opt it into their own mythologies and their own beliefs, which, you know, is a very human thing to do. Cough, cough, Rome, cough. But there's actually a whole funny thing about like Bretonia gets a lot of shit that like really almost all of the human factions should get shit for, because like being the lowest class of society, so like a peasant in Bretonia, is just as bad, if not maybe even worse than being the lowest class / peasant in the Empire. But Bretonia gets memed on a lot more about it because Bretonia was a lot more overt about how much it sucks in 6th edition.
Gotcha.
But if you go look at like 6th edition Empire, it was garbo. It looked so bad. Like the Empire is like full of flagellants, like people that are like putting their heads in like cages and like whipping themselves constantly, and they're like filthy and covered in fleas and shit and dirt and are just garbage. And it's like parades of these people torturing themselves, and that's just like a lot of the common Empire people because shit is that bad. And then 7th edition was like, no, okay, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. Like it's bad, but it's not that bad.
Okay, I see. Oh, there's so many more that we could talk about, but I think that was probably a good time to wrap up. 1 a.m. over on my side, so yeah. I gotta get going.
Yeah, it is that time.
All right.
But anyway, hope everybody had fun.
To anybody who still has questions, don't worry. We'll do this some more, so you guys can ask again next week. Probably.
Yeah, we'll be back next week indeed.
Roger that. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Hope y'all had fun. We'll catch you in the next one.
Yep, talk to you later.
Later.
Bye.